Alrighty, today we got a fun one. We're going to be talking with Josh Schachnow. Josh is a Canadian immigration lawyer, podcaster, and the CEO of Visto. As a Toronto-based immigration lawyer, he has helped over 100 skilled workers move to Canada. And to help scale those efforts, in 2019 he co-founded Visto, a platform that aims to give skilled workers a trusted, easy, and affordable way to immigrate and achieve permanent residence within Canada. He also is the host of Solopreneur Grind, a podcast where he interviews entrepreneurs running one-person businesses, where they share their insights and experiences of what can be a very difficult and lonely journey. We talked about that quite a lot on here. I was actually on episode 108 of his podcast. It was his first long-form episode and really had a blast. And if you enjoy this one, highly recommend checking that out and his other episodes. His podcast is great. Anyway, on this one, we dove into quite a lot, including podcasting, the benefits and risk of content creation, Joe Rogan and media censorship, the most alarming things that he sees as an immigration lawyer, what to do if you wanted to immigrate to another country, the impact of climate change, rising housing prices, and remote work on global immigration, the future of humanity, and lots more. Shout out to our dude Christopher Silvestri, a previous podcast guest. He recommended that we connect, and I'm very glad that we did. Anyway, let's dive into this one. I bring you the great and powerful Josh Schachnow. Where do you see all this shit with podcasting going?
I think you've got to be putting out quality in one way or another. Otherwise, you're just no one's gonna listen, right? Like everything you're talking about too, as it relates to trying to pump out more content. The market is the market, right? There's more content than ever. And the reality is people's attention spans are so much lower that if you start putting out crap just for the sake of putting something out, people are eventually going to stop watching, right? It might not be the next day, might not be the 5th video, but by the 20th, 30th, if you're putting out bad stuff, they're just going to migrate over to somebody else. So that's why I love the long form approach too, because you're having really deep, meaningful conversations, right? And the surface level content, the clickbaity. I was just having this conversation with an immigration professional in my industry yesterday on TikTok, because she saw this video that some like non-professional made with like a super clickbaity title, like riling everybody up about news that may or may not even be true. This is last night. And we're like, this is nuts. Like this can like negatively affect people, and people shouldn't be paying attention to some of this stuff. And, what can we do? Blah, blah, blah. So, I put out a video basically like trying to give correct information and assurances and stuff like that. And the reality is, if you're doing that over time, if you're putting out quality, genuine, authentic, entertaining, helpful content, doesn't have to be all of those things, but like a useful combination of those things, and it's consistent enough, over time, you're going to get people who like you for who you are, just like how you like Dan Carlin for who he is. And you're not going to go anywhere unless there's drastic changes, like a drop in quality and content. And I think that's only going to get more magnified as there's more social media platforms, there's more forms of content, there's more content, period, just in terms of quantity. So the people who just do it really well are going to succeed in the long term, and those who don't aren't. That's what I think.
No, I agree. I mean, it gets. I think it's like you can do those hacks, the misinformation. Like one client that I just started working with in the last week, they're having an issue where they have these doctors and like haters on TikTok that are just talking shit about their product, and it's completely wrong. It's misinformation. For every doctor that's on TikTok that's like saying that this product's not good for you, they have like 20 other doctors that are way more qualified saying, no, actually, we vet this. This is a good product and this actually helps people. And but people don't see that. Like people don't see the sea of doctors that are recommending this product for their patients. They just see like the issues, that one or two TikTok people put out there. It's like Steve Bannon has this line where he's like, his strategy is to flood the zone with shit or something like that. So it's just like, which is the nefarious tactic. It's like just spread as much misinformation as possible, and your opposition is going to spend all their energy just trying to disprove. It's going to take you an hour to sit there and compile all the evidence of why this is wrong. It takes somebody 10 seconds if they want to tweet something inaccurate,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the whole flooding the zone with, I mean, that's the whole issue with misinformation as a whole. But to kind of link back to what you're saying is like those hacks, those kind of clickbait bullshit, the videos that are overly dramatic and are like jump cuts and whatever, it's like that might get them more views and engagement. But I agree. I think it's a very short term thing. And I think what
Yeah.
they're doing is, um, I think about it all the time where it's like you think about some of the politicians. Like I remember when Trump and all that shit was going down hardcore, and the impeachment was going down, and like people thought, okay, maybe this guy's gonna be, maybe this is something, he's actually gonna have repercussions. Me, I'm politically agnostic. I think they're all assholes. So all that out of the way, um, I do very much so think Trump did a lot of illegal, fucked up shit. Whether you support him other ways or not, it definitely seems there was like some fucky shit
Mm-hmm.
going on, but there were like really no repercussions for it. And one of my friends was just like, I just told him, like, man, it just seems like they just robbed a bank and they got away with it. And it's crazy to me. And he's like, well, yeah, that's now. You could like 3, 4 years from now, they could be in jail and all that could have been for nothing. So he's like, you don't know long term. It looks like it's working right now, but you don't know the long term repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been something I've been considering with a lot of these influencers and content creators is that they're having success now, but they don't realize that they're building a personal brand that is unsustainable and might actually cause them to not be able to pivot. You do have people I was thinking the other day about Robert Patterson, like the dude from like Twilight and all that stuff. He hated Twilight. He thought it was garbage, but you did, at the time, he can't say that in
Right.
interviews because that's first of all, he's probably got, contracts that say he can't disparage the property, but eventually I'm sure those lapsed. And he's openly been like, yeah, I thought it was terribly written. I thought it was the horrible thing, but hey, it got me to where I'm being. And why I bring him up is because he's someone who's like, okay, now I got all this money. I don't have to work for the rest of my life. I want to do weird, weird movies. I want to do weird art house movies. And, he did like The Lighthouse and now he's Batman. And it's just really interesting because you can tell he's doing Batman, not because it's a big thing, because he wants to do this version of Batman, which is like really psychologically fucked up, I guess. And that's cool. Like that dude has pivoted. Now he's a respected actor and the indie people like him, which is weird because he was the
Mm-hmm.
opposite. He was the exact opposite. He was the embodiment of fake celebrity horseshit. And now he's like a respected actor. And I look at people like that and I'm like, man, how the hell did he do that 180 and pull it off? Because you have all these people that are like, oh, it's that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's that chick. Fuck them. Um, but you think about a lot of these YouTubers, and I don't know if they can make that transition because I don't think like somebody like a Robert Pattinson, they have that depth there. And then eventually that's able to come to the surface when the opportunity arises. But a lot of these YouTubers, I don't think they have that depth. Maybe some of them I'm sure, but a lot of them don't. So I don't think they're going to be able to pivot to like the next kind of phase and like make it. I don't know. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I remember one of the first kind of online celebrities was Frederick Fox, and he was kind of like, if he would have grown up now, I mean, he would be like a PewDiePie kind of, figure or
Yeah.
whatever. And then he was, huge back in the E-Bombs world, albino black sheep days, pre-YouTube. And then he just kind of faded away. And like I think about people like that, like they just now like I think last time I heard he's like a bail bondsman or
Hmm.
something. Like he's just living a normal life. It's just interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's up to the person, right? The smart, honest people will figure it out and the rest won't. They might not, but I don't know. I don't lose sleep over that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Personally, you know, I mean, it depends, right? Like if you're in the marketing game, the marketing industry, it probably hits a lot closer to home for you, right? For me, especially in the last year or two, I just focus on what's in front of me, right? And
Hmm.
you know, I don't pay too much mind to the rest, and it makes life a lot simpler, you know?
Yeah, it does. To me, I think it's because I'm an observer. I don't really care, but I like observing
Mhm.
trends, and I also like looking at how can I learn from what's basically how can I have other people um, experiment for me,
Yeah.
and how can I kind of observe what's happening? And so, like, what's happening with Joe Rogan right now is
Mhm.
fascinating to me. I think it's extremely fucked up. Even people that I've talked to that don't like Joe Rogan still think it's fucked up what the media is kind of doing to him right now because they're completely misconstruing everything. But I'm observing that because I'm like, this is the future of where things are going. If you're someone who's outside of the mainstream, like you're going to try, they're trying to try and take you down.
Mhm.
And so like I'm just kind of observing what's happening and seeing everything and being like, okay, if I even have a fraction of the audience that he has, like I'm going to have to deal with something like
Yeah.
this, you know? So how am I going to respond to it? And I want to have an idea how I'm going to respond to it ahead of time before you're in that moment. Cause then you got the fog, you know? And so I don't know. Maybe I'm stressing myself out, but I'm just, I like observing those things and seeing how I can learn from them.
Yeah, it's wild, right? It's wild, you know, the biggest name in the game, $100 million show and what's happening. It's crazy. Spotify surprised me too, right? Like,
because they stuck by them.
no, just because of all the episodes that came down, to be honest. Because they took a bunch down, right? Didn't they take like 100 episodes offline?
They took like 70 something. Yeah, and there's a lot of theories about whether that was them or Joe or guest requesting it.
I never thought of that. In my head, it was just kind of like, I don't think Joe requested them to take it down because that's like anti what he's trying to do, right? Is just have casual conversations and, you know, learn from it, hopefully, and just spread more, you know, hopefully just even thought provoking ideas and topics. My thinking was that Spotify probably took it down just to satisfy people and say, hey, okay, we get your concern. We're going to take a few down and hopefully it'll shut everybody up and, you know, we can go back to work tomorrow. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I just kind of took from it, which was kind of crazy because they spent $100 million on this guy, you know, and now they're taking
Yeah.
content. We just talked about how important it is to be putting out content, right? And how beneficial it can be to put out content. And they're taking down $100 million show content. So that's saying something. And the other thing
And
that
some of the
you think about, like
episodes go
when you
ahead.
relate it to like Facebook and Meta and, you know, talking about Twitter and like these platforms have so much power. And if, you know, what else can happen? You know, what will happen, right? This isn't going to stop, right? This isn't going to be the last Joe Rogan-esque saga. So how are we going to move forward, right? How are platforms going to police or not police or be swayed by the government, by the media, by the general population? I don't know. It's going to be a really interesting, like 5, 10 years as more of these platforms continue to grow and expand and have more influence. You know, how are they going to be policed? Where are we going to draw the line of freedom of speech and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I saw a TikTok video yesterday that was like, this is ridiculous. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and making you turn on Joe Rogan and listen to his 3 hour episodes, right? Like if you don't
Yeah.
like it, just turn off the show.
Yeah.
But I don't know, right? Again, then I get all wound up and I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna go back to work. But you know, I guess it's important to
Yeah.
talk about it, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, I don't, it's, I kind of take that outside observer and I'm just like, this is silly. Like, it's so clearly obvious to me, like what is happening as far as, you know, things like CNN and all the other stuff. Like, they literally said that he was taking horse dewormer. They took the video where he was talking about it and they like put a filter on it to make his skin look more gray. So he
Wow.
looked more sick. Like literally they have side by side, like the video from Instagram and the video that they aired. And it's obvious that they they put a filter on. And then, even like Gupta, like the one dude from CNN went on Joe's show, and Joe's always like super non-confrontational. But even he got like a little irritated, and he was just like, dude, I don't need to take horse medication. I can take people medication, motherfucker. Like I have enough money. A doctor prescribed this to me. My doctor prescribed this to me, along with like 8 other things. But they just focused on horse dewormer. And like I look at that and I'm like, man, is that like a nefarious kind of thing? Like there are, but you think about it, it's like Jeff Bezos owns a media company. Like, these people could just be like, you want to think that there's not this nefarious, like Illuminati kind of like conspiracy going on, but there doesn't have to be. It could literally just be a handful of people that are like, hey, we don't like this guy. We don't like his platform. We kind of see his competition. It's kind of taken away. Let's kind of like shut this guy down. And it's profitable for him at the same time because it's getting clicks, it's getting controversy. We're talking about it right now.
Yeah,
And,
that's
so
what
it's
I was
like
going to say. It goes back to what we were just talking about. Like horse
incentives.
trank. That's a great headline, right? Joe Rogan starts taking,
Yeah.
what'd you call it? Dewormer?
Yeah. It's like horse dewormer.
It's a great
But
headline.
but it's actually not horse dewormer. It's something that's used for like antiviral and stuff like that. It's used as like an anti-parasitic kind of thing. It happens to be also used for horses, but that's
not what the news says. Yeah.
They're like, he's taking horse dewormer, and how the whole thing started was ivermectin. There were people that couldn't get it. So they found out that ivermectin was used in horse dewormers, which you can buy anywhere. So they bought it, and they took too much because it's meant for fucking horses. So they took too much of it, and they ended up going to the hospital. But it turned out it was like only 3 or like a handful of people did that. But they made it seem like it was this crazy trend.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. A handful of people in Florida took horse dewormer because they're idiots. And then that snowballed into Joe Rogan is taking this medication, which is medically prescribed for people, and it's horse dewormer. And then they went on. I mean, the whole thing is just like, it's a stretch of a stretch of a stretch, but then it plays to a narrative. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm like, even thinking about YouTube, like me putting my episodes up on there, like I did a podcast the other day, and like one of the guests was like, oh yeah, the C word, meaning COVID, because we were talking about how shit's getting demonetized and shit's getting taken down. It's like, we can't say COVID or pandemic because we're worried about algorithms auto flagging and taking us down. What the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Like that's a weird space that we're in, where we're literally self-moderating the words that we're using in a video because we're worried about getting taken down. I don't know, man.
Crazy times. It's crazy times. And what you realize is, and maybe this has only been in the last 5-10 years, you realize how unobjective news can be. And that's like, I haven't watched the news in years. I never really liked watching the news, to be honest, at all. I just find it boring. But especially in the last 5-10 years, like if I think of the news, I want to watch or read something that just reports objectively on facts, right? Here's what happened. Here's how it happened. Here's why it happened, and then maybe there's a little sprinkle of like, their opinion or whatever, but that's totally gone, right? Like you said with the Rogan thing, like, especially when you come up with a headline, like if you think about the story, what should it, what's the core activity that happened? Joe Rogan had some people on who started talking about some non-traditional medicine to help fight COVID. What's the headline that you see? Joe Rogan takes dewormer that should be used for horses. You know what I mean? Like, think of the gap between those two statements. It's insane.
It's huge.
And you quickly realize how easy it is for people in these big news companies. These are like establishments. and how they can put such a spin. I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm not saying every article's bad, whatever. I'm saying this is why I just don't read it. I don't watch it. I don't read it. I don't even have cable, right? I haven't had cable in a while. That's a different conversation because of like streaming services and whatever these days.
Yeah.
But it's garbage. It's mostly garbage that I just don't want in my life. So I just don't pay attention to it. I love Reddit. I don't know about you. I go on Reddit every
Oh
morning
yeah.
and I let
Yeah.
the Reddit community determine, you choose the subreddit. So you choose the topics that you're interested in. And then the Reddit community chooses for me which articles come to the top. And I read the ones that, pique my interest. And the clickbaity ones I usually ignore, right? So I'm like, oh, well, this is probably stupid. This is probably a dumb take on something, So anyways, what about you? Like, how do you consume news? I'm putting in quotations here for those people listening. Like when I catch up, I use Reddit and I subscribe to like a daily email that I like because it seems unbiased and chooses good stories to talk about. What about you?
Yeah, I mean Reddit, I've been on Reddit for over a decade. Pretty much whenever the big dig.com exodus was, I think that was like 2007. So I've been on Reddit ever since then. Um, and yeah, I mean, I would say I use Reddit as my primary kind of absorption of content, because like the thing is if you just use Reddit passively and you just read the headlines, like it's not much better than traditional news. The only difference is that it's a little more democratized, and if you went to like the New York Times or foxnews.com or whatever and you went on there, you're probably going to get a pretty consistent slant to whatever the perspective is. Whether correct or not doesn't matter, but there's definitely a slant there and a bias. Reddit, by its nature, is less biased because you just got a lot of people that are all riffing. Doesn't mean that Reddit's not biased. Reddit definitely has, in general, a very kind of liberal viewpoint. And it's not that that's better or worse or anything, but it definitely is evident, because if you went on Reddit, unless you were like on R conspiracy or R conservative or R the Donald back when that was a thing, and the fact that the Donald got taken down was kind of concerning to me. Just again goes back to they're doing it for people that are acting perhaps nefariously, but then at what point do they start taking your shit down? That's a concern of mine.
Yeah.
But anyway, the main thing there is, I remember when Bernie was running, like, and it literally, if you were just on Reddit, it seemed like Bernie Sanders was going to win in a landslide, and then he didn't. Same thing with back in the day with Dig and Ron Paul, when the Ron Paul revolution was going on. Like, if you just were on Dig, it seemed like he was going to just explode. Like, I think I even talked about that in a podcast episode at one point. So it's like that echo chamber is a concern. But the thing that I like about Reddit in general is that it's got a little more democratized. But the thing about Reddit is, like, I don't pay attention to most of the headlines. What I do is I'm like, that's interesting. And then I go into the comments and I read the top 3 comments, because usually it's like a subject matter expert being like, actually, this is bullshit. And then, somebody will do a TLDR and be like, okay, this is what they're trying to say, but actually this is what they're saying. And that's what I like about Reddit, is that you have access to a tremendous amount of subject matter experts. And sometimes subject matter experts, even if they're real or they claim to be, they will sit there and have a discourse and talks amongst themselves. And usually your gut can kind of lead you into whether it's bullshit or not.
I do the same thing. I think the comments are the most valuable part of the entire website, right?
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So it's odd, I mean, Trump and a lot of the conservative people in his kind of his sphere is just like, oh, it's fake news. It's fake news. But like a lot of the time he's not wrong. Like, there is a lot of fake news. Now, he uses it as a gaslighting tool and as a propaganda tool to just be like, anything that's bad about me, that's fake. So that's inaccurate. Like that is, the way he's yielding that. He's using the fake news thing as like a shield. That's, I think, a bad actor. He's a bad actor in that regard. But the fake news thing in of itself, he's not wrong about. There is so much fake news to the point where I think Joe Rogan even brought this point up. He's like, if you're willing to slant an article and talk about how I'm taking horse dewormer and you're going to put a filter and make me look more pale and sicker, how are you doing that for everything else? You know, how can I trust you? And I think that's the thing. Like we were talking about timelines. I think that the mainstream media is hurting the trust is just completely eroding, but they don't realize how bad it is because they still have this generation. Like people our age aren't really consuming a lot of traditional news, but the older people are. As they start dying off, I don't think they're going to have like the pool. Yeah, they're not going to have the pool that they used to have.
Yeah.
So they think that they got a free lunch right now. Like they think that like they get to just hack and incentivize and get all the clicks and all the money now, and it's not going to have any long-term repercussions. But I think the long-term repercussion is going to be nobody fucking trust it.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to have this rise of more independent media, and I'm really curious to see how blockchain and crypto as a whole fits into it, because there may be ways of utilizing blockchain and AI to have instantaneous fact checking, and that's really interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains with that, though. There's going to be I think that you could create the facade that this thing is objective, but really put a slant in the algorithm, which is kind of what's happening with Facebook right now. So that's a concern of mine, because again, you could have this algorithm, but then you have a Jeff Bezos being like, "Hey, you know what? Let's dial it a little bit back about this universal basic income. I don't like that as much. It's going to make my taxes go up. Let's dial that back a little bit." You know, it's like that's not that I don't know anything about Jeff Bezos, but I'm just using him as a straw man, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. So I'm curious. You're an immigration lawyer, so how do you see this shit affecting how people perceive immigration? Because I remember when the whole, build the wall thing, shit ton of misinformation there. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, Canada and the US, if you talk about immigration, it's night and day, right? We had very different types of programs, and our countries have very different, I guess depends on who's in charge, right? But like a Trump-led US has a very different approach to immigration than Canada, right? Probably less so, now that Biden is in, I think he's a lot more pro-immigration, maybe not like super pro-immigration, but relative to Trump, right? I mean, anybody's pro-immigration relative to Trump.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a huge problem in probably many other countries around misinformation with immigration, because a lot of what happens, and this is something that is kind of a little bit unique to immigration, is by definition, you're coming from another country, right? So I practice strictly Canadian immigration. But what happens is that the immigrant isn't sitting at sometimes, yes, like we help people who are already in Canada get, permanent residence or get citizenship. But more often than not, you're helping people outside of your country. What's happened over time is, I'll just use a country as an example, India, because they're the biggest source of immigrants into Canada, probably the US too, but I don't know the US numbers as well. You have shops that open up in India. So let me take one more step back. Who is allowed to practice and charge money for immigration services? In Canada, there's two types of people. You can be an immigration lawyer, right? So you graduated from law school, you were called to the bar, blah, blah, blah. You're in good standing with the law society of your province. Canada's same as a state in the US, we have our provinces. Or what's called an immigration consultant. So you go to a school, they teach you about immigration, you take a test, blah, 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 you get a stamp. But what happens is those organizations are in Canada and they only regulate people in Canada. So what's happened is Joe Schmo in India opens up a shop in Mumbai and calls it Joe Schmo Canadian Immigration, and can sell Canadian immigration services to people who he can shake hands with in India to help them come to Canada. But he may or may not be regulated at all, right? He might have just read the government website, be like, "Oh, yeah, I can figure this out. $5,000, I'll help you go to Canada," right? And there's like virtually no regulation. So what's happened as well with social media Exact same thing. Now we see YouTube channels, TikTok accounts, Instagram accounts, where it's purely just marketing, big clickbaity headlines, 3 steps to do this, low price to do that, right? Because I can't compete with somebody who's pricing their services in India, right? Or Brazil, or, these other countries with much lower cost of living. So I get this now. I have a half decent following on LinkedIn and on TikTok. Every week, maybe a little bit more often, hopefully a little bit more often, I'll get emails or questions or DMs or comments from people who are confused or stuck or got scammed, from people who have no business creating and sharing content or giving suggestions and or charging money for their services. And it's really sad, right? First and foremost, it's just really sad, but it's a little bit of, and this is why part of my content is helping immigrants understand who they should and shouldn't trust, which is super sad, right? Most of my content is, hey, I'm going to share advice on different programs, eligibility, what to do, what documents, what is the latest news. And then like 10% of my content is like, hey, here's how you won't get scammed, right? Here's how you won't have to pay thousands. Sometimes people will pay tens of thousands of dollars to people who they never hear from again, right? Or they just ring them around for years and years. Yes, I'm just waiting for your permit to be processed. It was never submitted in the first place. It's a huge problem, man. It's a very, very big problem. I don't really know what the solution is. Part of the solution is these organizations have to find a better way to police the environment, right? The industry. Part of it is customers have to educate themselves and be careful. Like my key piece of advice is only work with a regulated professional, because you can see it online, right? If you Google Josh Schachnow, Ontario, Law Society of Ontario, you find my profile and it says I'm a lawyer in good standing, right? It's not hidden. You can go on the immigration consulting website and look up whether someone is in good standing or not. So my first piece of advice is always make sure you're working with an actual regulated professional, number one. Number two is some of them suck. Number two is go get a referral. Go ask someone who's worked with them, right? Hey, you use them. Did you get an approval? Was their communication good? Did they not answer your email for 6 weeks? Okay, maybe don't use that person, right? So it's almost like both sides have to do some improving, but it's very sad, right? Because you would hope if you're looking for services in any industry that wouldn't be such a common occurrence. And it's such a common occurrence. And it's really sad, especially when you're talking about people who English is a second language. They're in bad situation in their home country with their family. They're trying to start a new life in somewhere awesome. And then you get scammed, right? You add that on top. It's very sad. So do your research, right? In anything, do your research.
Yeah, and it's hard because trust is so tangible, like in the essence of like having that human interaction. And you can seem like the nicest guy in the world. But if you have somebody in front of you that is from your hometown and is there and is shaking your hand and it's like, yeah, I've done this hundreds of times, trust me. And then you've got some dude who has a website and he's some white guy in Canada, and it's like, who are you gonna trust? And you and me perhaps would do more due diligence, but if you're someone who's perhaps in a more stressful situation and you got the fog of war kind of going on, you're in the eye of the storm and you're just like, man, I need to get the fuck out of here. Or hey, like I got this job opportunity, like I need to go take it, and I need to go, fast or whatever. It's like you might have this pressure, and it's got to be hard. Like I just, it's like also the people that are the best salesmen, that they correlate directly, but I've seen like as a whole, but I would say in my experience, some of the most sociopathic people that just don't care are some of the best salesmen, because they can just shut down and they don't have that empathy that might get in the way, you know? And I say this as a salesman, so it's not like, it's
Yeah.
I don't think they're one and the same, but um, that's the thing. It sucks. You meet somebody, they talk a big game, and they're great. They shake your hand, they look you in the eye. We're gonna get you over there. You're gonna go over there, and then within 4 weeks, like you'll have this, and then 6 months later, you'll have this. It's fine. We got it. We got this pipeline, and then you go over there, and you're fucked. It's just like
Yeah.
I don't know how you could live with yourself doing that and knowing that that person and their family is over there and screwed just so you
Yeah.
could make a couple grand. It's like
Yeah.
I don't get it.
It's
Like,
it's actually, so now we're seeing the pendulum swing back. And I actually think this directly relates to YouTube content that we were talking about, right? So if we talk about both, it's like, okay, people used to just use trustworthy lawyers. People used to just create good content, right? Then the pendulum swings over. Now everyone and their mother is creating crapload of content and the quality's low. Everybody and their mother wants to be an immigration professional, is creating all this marketing content. I think the pendulum's starting to swing back for both, where it's like, okay, now people are only going to pay attention to the really good content creators, right? The genuine, authentic, good content. I've had people say to me, and so how that relates to my situation, I've had multiple clients say to me, Josh, I'm thrilled that you're a white Jewish lawyer in Canada because I've been scammed, or I've been, taken around the block by so many people in my country. I'm not going to name countries, but in my country who I can't trust, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I don't care, stereotype, whatever, doesn't matter to me. Right. Number one, I just want to help people. But number
sure.
two, like, said it to my face, Josh, I love working with Jewish lawyers, white Jewish lawyers. Please help me, right? Take my money. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
the pendulum's coming back, right? In a good way. So just, yeah, people got to do a little bit of extra research. It is hard for us to relate. And I don't want to sound like I'm on my high horse, because I'm a privileged white Jewish lawyer sitting in Canada, right? I've never been in a scenario where I had to desperately seek out a service provider to leave a terrible situation. Right? I'm born and raised in Ontario. I was born in Ottawa, the capital of the country. I'm now living in Toronto. Great place to live, fantastic place to live. I've had a very privileged life. So it's hard for me to put myself in those person's shoes. But if I can just provide any semblance of guidance, it's like, please just do your homework before writing someone a check, and hopefully you'll save a lot of heartbreak and just losing money for no reason, right? Is also what it comes down to.
Yeah. What are the bottlenecks that people often face going through the immigration process? Like, aside from sketchy people and misinformation, but what are the other bottlenecks?
Yeah, the biggest bottleneck is just figuring out which program to come through. So Canada is very immigrant friendly, which is a good thing because they create all of these programs to come to Canada. But that makes it hard because there's all these programs to come to Canada, right? So as lawyers, and I'm spending I'm spending a lot less time, I should say now, traditionally practicing, quote unquote, because I'm working on a tech company in the immigration space. But what my firm deals with a lot, like what we spend a lot of time doing as lawyers, is someone will come to us and say, hey, Josh, I want to come to Canada. How do I get there? I went on the government website. There's 130 programs. I don't even understand the first two, what they mean, let alone which one to pick, right? So far, and that's why it's hand in hand with that other problem, because the hardest part is the first step, right? It's not like, oh, I figured out the program. I got these documents. I just need like this last thing. And then, it's like most people don't know where to start. So if you walk into a shop around the corner and they say, oh yeah, we can help you pick the right program and apply. It's $3,000. They're like, well, what's the alternative? I got to figure it out. And it's like reading Chinese, unless you're in China, right? Which is easy. But anyways, you know what I mean, right? So the biggest problem is helping people navigate which program. The rest of it, like immigration law is, at least in Canada, is not rocket science, especially if you're a practitioner, like you're a professional, you know it well, right? Like if you went on the government website and tried to learn it right now, it'd probably be intimidating, right? But if you sat with me for 2 weeks, I could teach you to be an immigration lawyer. It's not rocket science, right? Wouldn't be bad at all, right? You're a smart enough guy, whatever. It's not hard, right? Like we just hired another legal assistant for the firm. She used to be a tax lawyer in Brazil. She's 10 times smarter than I am. I don't understand tax law. I took tax law in law school. I still don't understand it. It's so confusing and difficult,
There's
right?
some CPAs
That's why
I know that
tax
don't
lawyers
understand it.
are, sorry?
So there's some CPAs I know that apparently don't know it.
Well, it's even hard for them.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like, it's not that hard if you're working with the right people or if you just put the time in to understand it. But if you're in a dire situation, you want to move quick or you just have the money to spend on a professional, pick a good one. And once you pick the program, the rest is just kind of like gathering documents, filling in forms properly, So that's the biggest bottleneck. Finding the right program fits for you that will give you the best chance of getting accepted.
What's the general process like timeline wise? Because like one of the things, like I know a couple people that are Canadians that have immigrated to the United States, or they got a visa for working for like 2 years or something like that, and the plan is for them to eventually immigrate, but it seems like such a stressful thing. I remember at one point when I was thinking about going to Vancouver and kind of just working with a buddy of mine or something like that. And I didn't know at the time, like it was just a quick passing thing. And I thought that might be an interesting opportunity. I didn't know if that was just going to be a detour, like that was just going to be something that I did for like a year or something, or if that was something that I would want to do more long term, being up in Canada. I don't know. But even just the thought of going through that process, I'm just like, that seems like a lot of work right now. Like, and much like you said, like I would sit there and I would do the research, and I'd feel pretty confident within a day or two. I think I could wrap my head around pretty much everything I would need to know to get started, have a good idea. But I have a toolkit for doing that. Like literally, my job most of the time is deconstructing things and then figuring out how to articulate it easier and faster and better and to resonate with people as a marketing consultant. So it's just like I am uniquely good at deconstructing topics and stuff. The average person doesn't have that toolkit,
Mm-hmm.
So I think I wonder how many people just, I remember when like, oh, if this president gets elected, I'm going to leave the country and go to Canada. Like it was like a meme for a long time. And there were some people that I knew that were actually somewhat serious about it.
Yeah.
But then when the time came, they're like, that sounds like that's too much. That's too much.
Trump was great for my business. I'll tell you that much.
Really?
But well, yeah, I mean, because it's not just like citizens, right, Josh? It's foreign workers.
Yeah.
It's the H-1Bs in the US that, because of policies or because of the disheartening policies that they think might be coming, they'd rather come to Canada because they know they can settle here, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't take them 15 years to get a green card, or their president might on a whim the next day remove a program and kick them out of the country, right?
Yeah.
So you got to think like short term, is it easy enough to get a permit? Long term, is it easy enough to settle and start a life here that I might not have to drop and leave the next day? But to answer your question, number one, all of the applications are inherently stressful because of what you're going through, right? Doesn't matter whether you're a white dude in the US who wants to get a temporary permit to come work, or someone overseas who wants to start a new life in Canada. It's stressful. I've never been on the other end of it, coincidentally. Again, that's another thing I ironically cannot relate to, right? I cannot relate to like waiting for a visa to be processed. But from what I see and hear from clients, it is very stressful, right? And I don't doubt that. And I try to be compassionate when people are going through that. But it's like, they're so wide ranging, the programs and processing times. Like you're in a great position because you are a US citizen. which means that number one, you can come in tomorrow if you want, just as a visitor.
Yeah.
And if you just want to work remotely for a US entity, you can come in tomorrow as a visitor. Make sure you're not doing any work for Canadian corporations or being paid by any Canadian companies. And you can just work remotely for a couple weeks, couple months in Vancouver, wherever, somewhere warm, hopefully warmer, and then go home, right? Or you could apply through like you can apply at the port of entry for what's called like a CUSMA work permit. The Canada, US, Mexico, what formerly known as NAFTA, right? People might recognize NAFTA, is now called CUSMA, where it's easier if you're a Canadian, US, or Mexican citizen to get a work permit in one of those countries. So like if you said, Josh, I'm gonna retain you, I need a work permit. We could probably send you to the border next week with your work permit documents, and you just apply at the border and they give it to you and you're set, right? Or like I said, tomorrow, you just bring your passport and you come visit and work remotely. If you're an Indian native coming from India, applying for permanent residence could take you a year, 2 years, just to wait for the processing. Work permits less. So the big distinction is typically between what's called a temporary permit. So you want to come visit or work or study, you get a visitor or a work or a study permit. And those can range from anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. If you want to come directly through permanent residence, through a skilled worker program, or you have a family member that can sponsor you, you're looking at like probably a minimum 6+ months of processing. And there's a little bit more documentation to prep for it, right? So you might need medical exam, police background checks, all that kind of stuff. So I wish I had a shorter answer. It's a wide range, right? Depending on what kind of program, what kind of citizen you are. Are you bringing family members? What do you want to do here? You know what I mean? It's a wide range, and the requirements could vary widely. And so, that's why just first step of picking the best program for you is usually the hardest. And that's why, again, it's so important to pick the right people to work with if you're going to work with them. Because if you get that first one wrong, or like, here's part of why it's so easy, right? If you want to apply for PR, especially now there's backlogs because of COVID, average processing time is a year plus. So if you're running Josh's scam immigration shop on, India Street,
Yeah.
or, Mumbai Street, whatever you want to call it, you can take someone's money on day one, work with them and prepare their immigration application. I'm doing all this with bunny ears for those that are listening. Submit the application, aka not actually submit the application, and string that person along for over a year and just say, yeah, it's submitted. We're waiting. There's backlogs. There's that processing time's long. And then over a year goes by, and the biggest problem is not that you stole their money. You just wasted over a year of their life, right? Because if you never filed the application, there is nothing in processing, which means not only did you get scammed out of your money, but only when you realize you've actually been scammed, you then have to start all over again, right? So anyways, I don't want to belabor that point too much, but that's how terrible it is. You're pushing back people's plans by years, right? They want to start a new life anywhere. Doesn't matter. Canada, US, UK, Australia. I'm just listing some of the like notoriously more popular countries to immigrate to, especially for skilled workers. We work more often with skilled workers. It's so sad. It's very, very sad. So please be careful. Or if you know anybody who wants to go through the process, just make sure they're being careful. That's all I ask.
If you're, an American, you're someone who has, can work remote, skilled worker, whatever, like that situation, like, okay, hey, I have a client that is going to pay me a lot of money for like a year to help them come in and, and basically be like a fractional CMO or something. I'm just pulling out a hypothetical, like, but it's a big enough project where it's like, you should really be there in person. How long does that, it sounds like it's not a long process really to get that temporary permit, but let's say you're like, hey, I want to stay here permanently. Like I go to Toronto to work with you hypothetically, and then like it's a year and I'm like, actually, fuck, I got apartment here. I like it. It's cool. My partner likes it. I want to stay here. Like what is that process like?
Yeah, so it's you're gonna stop asking me legal questions soon because the short answer is it depends, right? I mean, I'm playing the stereotypical role pretty well here, but it really does depend on which PR program we can get you in through.
Mm.
And the problem is right now with COVID, some of them have been put on hold. So just for the purposes of this show, because like we don't want to go down necessarily the rabbit hole of how does Canadian immigration work, because I don't want to put listeners to sleep. But let's say this was pre-COVID. You come to Canada, you work in what's called a skilled position for a year, and you can apply for a program called Express Entry. It's a program, a permanent residence program designed for skilled workers. Average processing time used to be about 6 months. So you come, we could get you here next week, let's say on like a Kuzma style work permit. You work here for a year. You become eligible for Express Entry. You apply. 6 to 10 months later, you could have permanent residence. And that means you get it for up to 5 years. At the end of 5 years, you can renew it. Renewal's pretty straightforward. Your kids can go to school here. Your spouse can go to work and back to school too. You can go back to school, pay, regular tuition instead of international tuition. And then once you spend 3 years in Canada, you can apply for citizenship. So that's the big difference, right? And I've seen a big shift in the last few years. If we want to talk more about like the tech scene or like, the general economy and kind of like the global war on talent, if you're an overseas national and you want to come to North America, you go to the US and you gotta, the popular program there is the H-1B, right? Which is a lottery. You got to win the lottery to be invited to apply. And then last I heard, for Indian citizens to get a green card, which is the equivalent of Canadian permanent residence, could be a 10 to 15 year wait to get a green card. Just a green card, right? We're not talking about a passport. If you come to Canada on a work permit, you can get PR within about a year or two, down from 15 years. And within another 2 to 3 years, again, slightly depends on the situation, apply for a passport, Canadian passport, very valuable pad. So is the US, right? But a great passport to have, right? Which actually would then make it easier to get a US passport if you wanted to go down that route. But that's why I'm saying people make immigration decisions with short and long-term intentions in mind. Short-term being, which is a program I can find that's reasonable enough so I can go there to begin with. And in the long term, is there a smooth pathway to settle down and be there for a while and maybe get a passport, right? Some people want the passport, some don't. Doesn't really matter. You just keep extending PR. It's not the end of the world. But a lot of people want the passport because you can do it. If you don't have a great passport, quote unquote, getting a Canadian or a US passport, that's huge, right? Like I said earlier, I've never related to a lot of my immigration clients because the only time I've ever had to apply for a visa was for, I think, Vietnam, right? So I've been to the US, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Israel, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. I did the whole Southeast Asia trip. You don't have to apply to anything. The Canadian passport is just a golden ticket,
Yeah.
right? Same with US, right? You don't have to apply. You just show up. Maybe you fill out a little visa card when you land. I think it was either Cambodia or Vietnam where I think we actually had to like apply and we got like a 30-day, you fill out like half a page and you show them your Canadian passport. And then 2 days later, you have your visitor visa, right? We were backpacking. So it was super easy. Other than that, I've never had to apply for a visa in my life. It's insane. And only in the last 5 years, when I started practicing as an immigration lawyer, did I realize that the passport is a golden ticket, right? Especially if you like to travel. It's very appreciated, right? Because we don't know any better, right? All the places that you traveled, you probably didn't have any visa issues, right? You don't show up at customs and people question you to begin with, right?
I mean, the only time
So
I had
it's-
an issue
it's-
is the first time I went to Canada. There,
Oh, really?
well, yeah, but like they were just, it was a misunderstanding. But at first
Right.
he was just like, yeah, are you here for business? And technically, like, I kind of was, but I was also there to visit a bunch of friends because I had a bunch of friends in Vancouver. So, and he's like, "You here for business?" And I'm like, "Uh, yeah, I guess." Like, I didn't want to lie to him. Like, that was the thing that sparked going there. But also, I wanted to stay for like extra couple days and just visit friends. And I frankly would have went there to visit
Mhm.
friends anyway, even if the thing did it. But it just sped that up. And he's just like, "Oh, what do you, what kind of business you here for?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm a consultant. I'm working with these guys. They're a startup and whatever else." And he started asking me a lot of weird questions like, "Are you starting a business here?" And I'm like, "No, no, I'm working with, I'm working with a company here." And he started asking me like a lot of weird questions. And he's just like, "Well, we might have to wait. You might have to apply for this." And I was like, "What?" Like, I was like,
Mhm.
"What?" And then I re-explained everything. I'm like, "I am a consultant. I'm working with a local thing. I'm on retainer. This is not a huge thing. I'm not buying anything.
Mhm.
I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm literally a marketing consultant. I'm just coming here to visit them, and also I have friends here." And once I, like, reiterated it, like, twice, he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, go," and he just
Yeah.
rushed me off, and I don't know what I said that made him think, because like, my partner was there, and she's just like, I thought you were pretty straightforward," but I don't know, he heard something
Right.
else, and
It's probably like a scenario where you said a trigger word,
sure,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Like you mentioned something about consulting or business, and because really what he's trying to figure out is, are you just visiting or might you be doing business here?
Gotcha, yeah.
And so when you say like, yes, that's probably like kicks him into high gear. So he's okay, I got to dig into
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
starts
yeah.
asking follow-up questions, and he might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed and he just didn't understand and, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, my buddy
But yeah, once you get it
one
right,
of my friends was just like, "Dude, just say you're visiting friends, like, just keep it simple, like, you're gonna be in."
well, that's the thing. If you're going in to just like talk about over a beer the thought about maybe helping them one day, you probably didn't need to
Yeah,
mention it, but you you don't want to be ever caught in a lie either at customs. So I think you did the right thing. I would maybe like next, if you were going to do something, I mean, if you ever need help, just send me an email either way, or, we'll get on a 5-minute call and I'll tell you what to say. But, you know, just being, being overly clear never hurts, right? And we see this every week where you prepare an immigrant. So let's take this to the extreme, right? We're submitting an immigration application. So in your case, you're at customs, right? You're there in person and they're trying to decide, are you just coming as a visitor? Do you maybe need like a business visitor visa, whatever. But if we're submitting like a big permanent residence application with pages and pages of supporting documents and blah, 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 we've had scenarios where like an agent will come back and request a document that we submitted or ask a question about something that we clearly already described. Like at the end of the day, you're showing up in front of person, right? A real person. Unfortunately, they have automated some of it, but not all of it. At the end of the day, there's a person on the other end, probably not getting paid that well to make a decision, right? For you or for the aspiring immigrant, this is a like life altering
yeah,
decision. For them, you're just another number, right? Maybe they had a bad day, or maybe they're just plain not that intelligent. They misread a sentence incorrectly. They make mistakes, right? The problem is that they can be rough mistakes. Like it can have very bad consequences for an aspiring immigrant if an agent makes a mistake and it causes delays and it causes months more of processing times because they made a mistake. One time I had Immigration Canada send me the wrong person's approval letter. So like you apply online, when they get approved, they send you an approval letter with the client's name on it. They sent me somebody else's approval letter. I was like, is this real? Like I read it 5 times. I was like, I don't have a client named that. And then, you send them an email and they fixed it. But I was like, that's a really bad mistake. Like that's very confidential information but anyways, what I'm trying to say here is that they're people too, right? For good and for bad. And so we gotta over prepare and over provide what's asked and overly clarify so that it's hopefully as clear as possible and as an easy decision as possible for them, if that makes
Yeah, for
sense.
sure. I mean, when I went through that experience, it was pretty brief. It was like 4 minutes of me talking, but I
Hmm.
saw people going up to the people, and they're just like, sat there. They talked for like 30 seconds, and then they punch a little thing, and they're like, "All right, right on your way." And then we talk over there, and he's asking me these questions, and like I just kind of had this like little jolt in the back. Like I wasn't panicking, but I had this little jolt of like anxiety, be like, I have a 2 hour
Hmm.
buffer, and then we have to at get at the very least get to our hotel, like get this stuff situated, and then get like a taxi or whatever downtown. I have a regiment. Like we had a whole day and evening planned. We had the next 3 days planned, and I'm just sitting there like he's just like, well, yeah, we might have to wait and like do this and do that. And I was like, I don't have time for this. Like you're gonna fuck up all my shit. And that was a moment where I was like, Jesus Christ, like, I will probably get through this and it'll be fine, but, like, what if I wasn't coming from the United States? What if I wasn't just, like, a white dude that was well-dressed and, like, what what if all those things and they're just like, actually, yeah, you're gonna have to be here and you're gonna have to be here for a while." Like, that loss of ability to do anything, like, you're basically detained, and I was just like that hit me.
Yeah.
And it was a brief encounter, but it was enough to speak to hit me and be like, "Wow, okay, there's a lot more here." And, like, I became not that I wasn't, empathetic before, but even just having that really, really super minor, like, experience, like, kinda just opened the door to really having an understanding of the level that some people, deal with. I remember when the whole COVID thing was happening, like, the people were talking about they spent all this money to get on a plane ticket and to get there, and they had all these plans and all this other stuff, and for some people, that was a big monumental trip, and then they're just like, "Now you gotta go back home." Like, not your fault, nothing to do
Mm.
with you, you gotta go back home." I'm just like, "Jesus fucking Christ," like, that total loss of agency, and what are you gonna do? You're stuck in a fucking airport. Like, you can't do
Yeah.
anything. All they're saying the only option you have is to get in another plane and get the fuck out of here, and I'm just like, "Man." Yeah. Um,
It's
it is.
crazy. It's not all bad, right? I don't want us to paint too dark of a
Yeah.
picture. Most of the time it's fine, right? And most agents are good, right? Most people are good people. But, I've been doing this now for over 5 years. So you hear the horror stories. You see, unfortunately, some of the horror stories. But most of the time it's fine. I don't want to scare people into traveling and trying to immigrate, right? But yeah, it can happen. It can happen. And so guys like us, people like us, should appreciate what we've got, right? That passport is so valuable. So, anyways, that's just something I've kind of like come to learn and appreciate in this industry over the last few years.
Yeah. What trends do you see occurring when it comes to, like, immigration?
It's a good question. Few. Number one is remote work, I think is here to stay. And part of the reason is it just gives companies so much more freedom and access to top talent, right? Because top talent is only now starting to really become top talent. Because before, like now or a few years ago, top talent was who are the best. I'm just going to use tech workers as an example because that's primarily what we work with. The top tech workers for your company were the top tech workers in your city, right? But now it's become the world's your oyster, right? Because everyone's so much more used to it thanks to COVID. And more companies are becoming more and more willing to leverage immigration to hire people remotely. And if they work out well, bring them over. Another trend is companies are opening up in immigrant friendly countries. So more and more, I see this, month in, month out, more and more US companies are opening up Canadian offices because they don't want to deal with the H-1B lottery. They don't want to deal with the stress that their top talent has to go through trying to get a green card. And they also save a few bucks, right? Paying Canadian wages. So I think more and more we're going to see remotes here to stay. I think most people would agree.
For sure.
I'm not saying every company is going to be fully remote, but I'm saying more and more companies are way more comfortable with either fully remote or hybrid or starting out remote or blah, blah, blah. And I think we're going to see even more global mobility. I think we're going to see smart companies being more flexible with how they hire and where they hire. And I think we're going to see smart countries creating better programs to attract those companies, because it's already happened. Like if you walk down some of the main downtown streets of Toronto, you see all the major US companies have offices here. Some of them have multiple, right? You'll see Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, obviously Shopify's Canadian, Amazon. They all have offices here already. Montreal has become a big hub for AI. Apparently Vancouver's making a little bit of a stink in like Web 3.0 and crypto and stuff like that. So, and a big part of that is immigration. So I think slowly the US is going to start improving their immigration programs, less so related to refugees, which is a bit of a different conversation, more so related to skilled workers and the war on talent, because it's only getting more competitive. If I look back 3-4 years ago, my conversations with companies were, hey, do you know what immigration is? Like, here's how you can leverage it to build your teams. The last year or two, it's become companies reaching out to us and being like, Josh, we can't find people here. We're already starting to look abroad. Please help us put in place an immigration program so that we can start bringing them over, right? Hey, Josh, I just gave an offer to a senior dev in Toronto for $170K, which is higher than it's ever been. And they just accepted an offer from Google for $200K US, and they don't have to move. They can stay in Toronto. And I'm like, this is crazy, right? And it's not going to get any better because we're not graduating enough STEM grads. And, we're a small country, right, by geography. And there's not enough supply. Where's the supply going to come from? It's going to come from outside, other countries. And the really, really smart governments are going to be the ones that keep putting in place programs that allow companies to attract and keep the top talent here. It's slowly going to continue happening. Canada, thankfully, has already been doing that the last 5, 6, 7 years. I still think there's a lot of room for improvement to make it better, but they're, globally recognized as like consistently like number 1 or number 2 in terms of immigrant friendliness as a country. Other countries that have been like pretty, similar or we'll call it like more innovative with like immigration programs are countries like Australia, the UK, France, Portugal. I've been hearing about more and more has done a really good job of attracting digital nomads and investors. I just learned about this week. A guy was telling me that if you want to move to Portugal, you can go buy a house for like there's a minimum threshold. I forget if it's like 3 or like 500 grand, buy a house, and then you can get PR within a couple of years. Yeah. I'm like, that's brilliant, right? That's like who you want to target, right? You want like younger middle-aged skilled workers, right? Who are going to come and fill the demands of the companies in your country for decades, right? They're going to come in their mid to late 20s. They're educated. They're smart. They're going to come work for all these tech companies or all these banks or whatever and fill those shortages. Or you want the like wealthy investors and entrepreneurs, right? Who can create jobs, buy assets, pay taxes, right? All that kind of stuff. It's going to be a very interesting, I think, 5 to 10 years. We said this about content creation earlier. I think it's going to be a very interesting 5 to 10 years for immigration and global mobility. And you know what? I think it's going to be an interesting 5 to 10 years in general. I don't know if you agree or not, sure. Josh, like just where the world's going.
It's
specifically for those
chaos,
things.
But also it's sure as fuck interesting.
Oh yeah.
You talk about crypto and Web3, which I am very, very deep down the rabbit hole into. And it's like, that's going to change everything. Like, even a family friend of mine who's, pretty tech illiterate, it's just like asking me to help him invest in crypto. He's just like, yeah, he's like, he's like, it's obvious to me, like, this is the future. This is the future, like with an inflation and everything. And I'm like, wow, all right. He's talking about it. Like, the paradigm is shifting, and there's just so much that's happening. What?
Crazy. Josh, can we cut for, I got a pee so
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah.
Can we cut for 2
Yeah, let's
minutes?
go for it.
Like, I don't need a long
Yeah, you're
break.
good. Alrighty, and we're back. We took a break, and I where do you see, like, what do you think the winners and the losers are going to be over the next, like, decade? And I want to follow that up with an even longer term perspective. But over the next, like, 10 years, based on what you're seeing, just really how the trends that you see in immigration, like, who do you think the winners and
Well,
losers would be?
who are we talking about? Are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about companies? Are we talking about industries? Are we talking about
I'm thinking
countries?
more like countries, because, like, you
Yeah.
mentioned Canada being very up there. United States, hit or miss, depending on who's in the office, I guess. But and then Australia, you mentioned, is like making a lot of gains in that area. Um, Vietnam is one that I know a couple people that have been going through the process of there, and it's a little difficult, they found, just because.
I've heard that Vietnam has a little bit of a tech boom going on. I don't know the full details. These are kind of just like rumblings I get. But usually when I hear like 2 or 3 rumblings of the same country, I'm like, okay, it's probably semi-accurate. But from what I'm hearing, Vietnam is starting to spit out a lot of very talented grads and, some good talent. And what ends up happening too is in countries like that, where they're maybe, less established, they then start going to school in other countries, right? So like a lot more now. So over the last couple of years, those, Vietnam citizens will go to the US for a master's, Canada for a master's, whatever. And then they'll start, working at a big company, or, start a good career, or go back to Vietnam and start a startup and, blah, blah, blah. But I think it very much relates to the countries that are forward thinking about where is the economy going and how do we attract people and keep them here? Because what's the economy? Well, it's like people and businesses, right? What are businesses? Groups of people, right? So the reality is, if you can attract and keep the best and brightest, you're probably going to have more output, right? This is obviously a somewhat sweeping generalization because there's way more that goes into it.
Sure.
And government subsidies and other external forces and factors and blah, blah, blah. But what we'll see is, if, like, for example, if the US continues to make no innovation in terms of like improving the immigration quality for skilled workers, you're going to see a slow shift away to countries like Canada or countries like the UK, or whatever. So I really think, total bias because I work in immigration, right? But immigration is going to play such a vital role in the next 5 to 10 years. In the micro sense, let me give you an example of some of my complaints I have about Canada right now is because of COVID, we're seeing huge backlogs. So here's like a micro example that will kind of explain my thinking. Because of COVID, the government had to go work from home, right? Which meant they slowed down. They had to figure out systems, blah, blah, blah. And then in 2021, not to get into too many details, Canada did big sweeping invitations to large groups of people. So you have a combination of like too many people applying at once and not enough people to process the applications quick enough. So anyways, we have a big backlog right now. What that led to was that program I was telling you about, Express Entry, used to be a world-renowned great opportunity for those that were eligible to come directly into Canada with permanent residence. You didn't even need a permit. You could come from outside Canada, land as a permanent resident. Great program. Now it's got like a year-plus long backlog if you're even eligible to apply. So what am I seeing on the ground? People smart people in countries around the world. Like, I'm just going to name a few countries, just that we tend to work with a lot of citizens from those countries. I'm not saying these are the only countries where immigrants come from, but we just happen to work with a lot of skilled workers, come from Brazil, they come from Mexico, they come from India. What it made them think in the last month or two is, well, this program's backlogged for over a year. I'm going to start looking at another country to see, because I want to move sooner rather than later, which one will be best, right? So what's going to happen, what's already started to happen is the best skilled workers from around the world are going to become more and more attractive to these different countries. And the companies within them. It's up to the countries to make it as attractive as possible for those candidates. Let me give a real life example. This is an example, but this isn't a real person. There's a data scientist right now sitting in Mumbai in India. He or she, we'll call her she, she's brilliant. She's got 10 years. She's got a master's in whatever, data science. She's been working for North American companies in like their Indian office for 10 years. Brilliant data scientist. There's a million companies that would love to employ her, right? What's happening now is that the power is shifting. Years ago, and maybe even kind of now, it's like, okay, as a skilled worker in India, which company will sponsor me so I can move there, right? Can I get a job at a US company so I can start my life in the US? Can I get a job at a Canadian company so I can start my life in Canada? What's going to happen is, and slowly starting to happen, that example of a brilliant data scientist is in such high demand that now they have the choice. They have a job offer from a tech company in California, from a tech company in Toronto, from a tech company in London. So now the decision is up to them, right? Which country can I get a visa quickly? Which country leads to quicker permanent residence? Which country has a lower cost of living? Which country has better tax incentives for, what I want to do? The smart countries are going to be leading the game in terms of, being the answer to those questions, right? Good immigration, smooth pathway to permanent residence and or citizenship / passport, great schools for their future kids, good healthcare systems, let's go back to the pendulum, right? That pendulum is swinging, and the skilled workers over the next 5-10 years are going to have all the power. That's where I think we're going. And that's why you see all these tech companies building out global mobility teams, global mobility processes, in-house immigration specialists and experts, right? We're already going there. It's just going to come quicker and quicker.
I'm really curious to see how basically like how the remote work thing is going to change developing countries or countries that aren't, the typical, UK, US, Canada, whatever, where particularly like I know like a lot of South American countries, there's a lot of great tech people. I've worked with some amazingly skilled web designers, UX designers, developers that are in, various South American countries, and they have an enormous amount of experience, but they still charge like middle of the range prices, even though here they would be very high end on the price scale. And it's just because the conversion rate works so much in their favor. I mean, same reason why, like every time I go to Canada, I was just like, this is great. Everything's a third off, like it's, so it's just like, it's cheaper. But that also was an issue for me. I had a lot of Canadian clients and everything was a third more expensive if they were paying for my services. So that was sometimes that goes in the other direction. But it's like if you're in one of those countries, you like where you're living. It's not one of those things where it's like, okay, this is an oppressive government or oppressive situation. If you like where you are, Jesus Christ, I mean, you could work. I think it's amazing that there's so many more remote work things. Like you could get a full-time job, and basically make Silicon Valley like pricing, and just live like a fucking king or queen, and not have to move. and not have to go. And I mean, that's amazing. That has existed, Upwork, freelancing, all that stuff for a while. I mean, I've been hiring people remote for 10, 15 years now. But it's just so much different. I mean, even my partner, like my fiance, like she works for a company that's based out of California. She hasn't met any of them in person. And like we're in Dayton, Ohio. Cost of living is super cheap. So she's able to make a salary that is equivalent to California prices
Hmm.
here in Dayton, where the cost of living is like anywhere from a third to a fifth. It's ridiculous. So it's
Yeah.
just like it's really interesting. And like for somebody in the United States or Canada, yeah, that's it's cool. It's like if you're in a more off the beaten path place like Ohio and I am, where cost of living is affordable, that's great. But then you think about multiply that by a factor of 10 or more if you're somewhere else where the conversion rate works massively in your favor. I'm really curious to see what that does to the not only the individuals. I mean, there's plenty of case studies of examples that people I know that do that. But on a geopolitical landscape, like how that changes the power structure, you know.
Yeah. I think ultimately it's just going to smooth out the like average wage per country,
Mhm.
right? Because it's exactly like you're saying, right? Like you can hire people in the Philippines for $5 an hour, right? And they can live a good life off that. But what's going to happen is maybe not really good developers, but like, VAs and whatever. But what's going to happen is, again, as things get so competitive, the Googles of the world, like it doesn't, it's a rounding error for them to hire another dev for 250K USD, right? It's like nothing, right? Like you and
Yeah.
I dropping a dollar bill, we have loadies here, but for you dropping a dollar bill on the ground. So they don't have to take a second thought to offer a Vietnamese, or what was I using? A Filipino software developer who's really good and offering them 150, 200K USD per year. Now that person like lives like an absolute king, right? Like they could probably retire the next 3 generations of their family. But slowly that's happening more and more because Google's like, there's not enough of them here. I have to go outside and find them and pay them enough. And to them, like 200K is enough. 200K is cheap, right?
Yeah.
From what someone sent me a document a few weeks ago showing us that like FANG companies in the US, the Facebooks, Amazon, whatever, Netflix, are offering senior developers like 800K USD to work remotely. It
Yeah.
is sometimes off like 1 or 2 interviews, right? Like I had a client of mine, a Canadian company. I've never heard this so many times in the span of 6 months, over and over from multiple companies. Josh, we can't compete on price. There's all these US companies now offering USD remote pay. We can't compete with them. So they start hiring remote. But basically, this one scenario was we were in the middle of interviewing for a candidate located in Toronto. We're a Toronto based company. We're putting them through the gambit, right? 3, 4 interviews, a tech assessment, blah, blah, blah. They got a job offer for 300K USD to work remote after one interview with a US company. One
Yeah.
call. Oh, you're good. Here's your offer. What are you supposed to do? Right. And
Yeah.
so more of that is getting pushed around the world. And so I think what's going to slowly happen is more and more of those remote workers in those countries with lower cost of livings, their wages are going to slowly come up, which is a good thing, right? For
Yeah.
them. It's also an opportunity, right? Because like you and I, we don't have to live in North America, right? Effectively, what you're describing is geohacking, right? You and I could go rent, if we want to get real extreme, we could go rent a 2 bedroom in Thailand and split the rent and live on like, what? I don't know, 1,000 USD a month and make 5, 10, 20K USD a month, live like kings, right? We could do that. People do that. A lot of people do that. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we're going to see more movement in the sense of people from countries where they're not happy moving to countries where they are happy, and people from expensive countries moving into slightly less expensive countries. So what does that result in? It's just more movement. I think we're going to see more movement, and it'll be interesting. Part of what we're building at Visto is a platform to make sponsoring workers better, because my underlying thesis is that we want to make the global marketplace more efficient, right? Because the bigger companies with the bigger wallets aren't necessarily bringing the best workers into their office because they're somewhere else, right? They're in another country. As the immigration programs get better and the creativity and the desire and the need of these companies get bigger, we're going to see a greater flow of movement where the best workers are going to move to the best, again, quotations here, best countries for them, for the best companies for them. And it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see it play
it's
out.
really interesting, the arbitrage that you can live on, like you were saying, hey, I'm going to go to Thailand or whatever. And I think that's an interesting intersection with, those trends that you're talking about, and also just cryptocurrency. I mean, like, it's going to be at a point where it's like, everyone is going to be on some sort of universal currency, whether that be Ethereum, Bitcoin, doesn't fucking matter. There's going to be something that is going to start universally being more widely accepted. And then that arbitrage kind of goes away. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes things as well. Like, not being able to live off of that conversion rate in the same way. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I just see everything smoothing out increasingly, which I think is good. I think what it's going to do is it's going to stop, countries like the United States having such a stronghold over all these other countries. And that's not going to fucking go away overnight at all. And there's a lot of other levers that control that can still be, pulled and utilized. But the GDP issue is going to increasingly smooth out. I think the only issue that's going to occur is AI, automation, Web3, all that stuff. If all these are still located in the US or Canada or whatever, then that could be, who are all the next Googles, who are all the next Apples that are we can't even foresee. But what's really interesting is so many of these startups are all over the world. Like, they used to have to go to Silicon Valley like that, or go to New York, or go to wherever, London, to try and be like, this is, the hot spot. This is where we're going to be. But I talk with founders every day, and like a lot of the founders that I'm talking with, like, they're completely remote. Like, one I just talked to the other day, like, they're in San Francisco and like Austin, like the two founders. It's just like, then there's another one that I was talking to that's like over in Norway. And it's like, it's just all these startups that are occurring that are all over the place, and they're not having to flock to big cities because they are like remote, So it's just like that. Once you have that decentralization in a lot of ways, and those hotspots aren't the big draw that they used to be, it's like, how does that impact everything as well? I mean, there's just so much that's going to be changing, and there's going to be a lot of variables that are going to come into play that, like, we can't even foresee, So it's just, it's fucking fascinating. How do you see climate change? Like, let's just say climate change is as disruptive as advertised, There's increasingly a lot of contention over how big of an issue it's going to be. It doesn't matter. Let's just say all the catastrophic events happen over the next 50 to 100 years. How do you? Canada's gonna, if that simulation occurs, Canada's gonna be in a very good spot. Very good spot.
Yeah. I'm so lucky for so many reasons to be in this country. Maybe we're not even alive when the time comes that it's, more valuable to be in a country like Canada due to climate change. But it's funny, climate change actually popped into my head a few minutes ago when we were talking about these different factors, because there are all these factors, right? When considering the quote unquote value of moving to a specific country. And I think it'll absolutely play a part. I firstly want to highlight, kind of like what you said, everything we're talking about is not overnight, right? It's going to be gradual. It's going to be more of an evolution as opposed to a revolution, right? These are slow moving. We're talking about government programs and climate change. These are like not overnight changes, but that's going to become another factor as it starts to play out, right? I don't know a lot about climate change, right? I don't know. It's hard to ignore in the sense that we just see it, right? This totally anecdotal. When I was growing up in Ottawa, every winter, I'm not that old, right? I'm 31. So every year growing up, we had through the winter. So I'm talking probably like December-ish to like February, March, 6-foot high snow piles the whole winter, right? Like on our lawns, or, they would come kind of like snow plow the streets. So like on the side of the street, there'd be like 6-foot tall piles of snow the whole winter. As of like 10 years ago, we just don't get as much snow. It's like, I don't even care what a scientist says. Just look on your yard, like it's like half the amount of snow. That like, it's not random, right? Again, totally anecdotal. I'm not saying climate change is as scary as whatever. I'm just saying from what I see up here in Canada,
Oh, for sure,
something's happening, right? And we're hearing about it and we're seeing other stuff too. But I think the reality is, as you said, if climate change plays the part that it seems like it could play, it's going to be not next year, probably not the next 5-10 years, but whenever it does start to really make a stink, that will be an added factor of the attractiveness of every country, right? Hey, weather already plays a part, right? So right now, it actually, I guess you could say, not climate change, but climate already plays a part in people's decision-making, right? I've talked to aspiring immigrants who are like, no, I don't want to go to Canada. It's too cold. I don't want to deal with the winter. Or I don't want to live in Toronto. I want to go to Vancouver because it's not as cold in the winter, right? So weather is already a factor. It already I want to go to Australia. I can surf 12 months a year, whatever. So it already plays a part, but it's going to be extremely intensified if what they say happens, right? Because apparently what's going to happen are things like Florida's going to get flooded, right? And it's going to get so hot in some countries that you might not be able to go outside, right? Otherwise you'll, God knows what. So that's going to become a factor of deciding which country to live in. And the other thing is, from what it seems like, we're going to have less space to work with, right? Like there's a finite amount of ground on the planet, right? Population's not going down. And if more and more of the earth becomes uninhabitable, too hot, too cold, too many tsunamis, whatever it is, we're going to have to fit more people in less space. So how are we going to manage that, right? Aside from like the, hey, let's go inhabit Mars and stuff like that, because that's kind of a different conversation. Well, maybe it's kind of related, but, for the purposes of what we're talking about here is we're going to need to make some big changes. We're going to need a lot more, and we see it like a lot more climate tech and a lot more programs and strategies on how to make use of the space. Luckily, we got a lot of room in Canada, right? Most people don't know that Canada's, I think, the second largest country by land mass. The problem is that but the reality for right now is like 90% of our population lives within 10 kilometers of the border because it's friggin' cold, right? The further north you go, maybe not 10 kilometers, like 100 kilometers, I think. I don't know. Fact check me for sure on this one. But something like 80 or 90% of our population lives within 100 kilometers of the border. But as things warm up, we can slowly start moving more north and making use of that space. But while that's happening, what countries are losing space due to water levels rising and or it being so goddamn hot that you can't breathe outside? So I don't know. part of me thinks I'm long gone before that actually takes huge effects. Maybe it's a selfish, comment, but it's going to have a huge effect when it does, it already kind of does on a small scale. But when shit starts getting real in terms of like hot temperatures, water levels rising, it's going to play another big factor in people's decisions on where to live.
It's going to be interesting because I know in a lot of countries, like population is declining, birth rates are going down. And then, countries like, I believe, could be wrong, believe that the United States is birth rates going down, but it's sustaining itself due to immigration. So it's just really interesting to see that a lot of the overpopulation may not be as big of a deal as we kind of thought it might be. It'll be interesting. I kind of want to have somebody on the podcast that's an expert in that area and kind of dive into that. But some people that I know that work full time as analysts, like, I was talking with one about the housing market, and he's just like, I'm not too worried about it. He's like, it's not really a bubble. He's like, it's not really like, it's not going to continue going in this crazy path because eventually all the boomers that own most of these houses, they're going to start to die, or they're going to start to go into retirement homes. And then you're going to have an excess of housing, and it's going to kind of level itself out. But he's like, that time horizon is still, 10, 15, 20 years, So, then you have an issue of not enough hospice care, like not enough, elderly. It's just, that's a whole other issue in of itself. My sister's a nurse, and they're already like having problems having, nurses or, nurse aides or any of that stuff. So a lot of interesting things that are all going to come together. What's your thoughts on like all this foreign money coming into Canada? Like in Vancouver in particular, with a lot of Chinese money. I mean, it seems like it's causing I'm sure there's a lot of benefits, but just from the outside, anecdotally, it seems like it's causing a lot of issues as well. It has nothing to do with it being Chinese people or anything to do with that. It has nothing to do with race. It's just you have a lot of foreign capital coming into your city, and people are using it. They're looking at buying property as like an investment. I remember last time I was in Vancouver, we got a taxi downtown, and the guy was just talking about how he's getting priced out of town, even renting. And he's just like, that house, that house, that house. He's like, no one, he's like, I drive these streets every day. Nobody lives there. He's like, there used to be a family there 3 years ago. Now it's been sitting empty. Their house, like everyone, like once a month, people come and trim the outside of it. That's it. Nobody lives. He's just doing all this stuff. He's like, that skyscraper there, nobody's in that building. Like, he's just pointing all this stuff out, and it's just everyone that I know, again, anecdotally, but lives in Vancouver, like, it's rent's going up, cost of living's going up, and it's just like, I'm curious to see how big of an issue is that? Is that mostly just a Vancouver thing, or is that kind of across the board?
No, so it's super interesting that you asked that right after talking about like housing crisis. I mean, I don't remember if you use the term housing crisis, but in Canada, specifically in the bigger cities, partially anecdotal, partially me seeing a lot on Reddit and reading the news, Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa have notably been insane in the last 1 or 2 years, to the point where, like, I have a buddy who's been looking for a house in Ottawa for over a year, and everything's going for 6 figures over asking. And what happens is a few things. So number one, there's a lot of money coming in to Canada, probably the US too, as you said, from countries like China, wealthy individuals from China, from India, from, Saudi Arabia, like all these countries that have a lot of money, they see housing in Canada as a safe investment, which it probably is, right? And so they just buy stuff, to the point where I forget how many years ago, the Canadian government put a foreign investor tax on buying property. It's something crazy. Like, I don't remember, like 30% or 35%. I don't know. I'll fact check it after, but it hasn't slowed it down. Right. Cause I guess, like, if you're like an oil baron in the Middle East or whatever, and you got like millions or billions of dollars, you don't care about paying 30% tax on $1 million house in Canada, especially if you know that's going to be a safe investment, right? It's not going anywhere. And the values just keep going up. What's happened is that our generation can't buy a house. Like just like your friend was saying in Vancouver, in Toronto, I'm 31. Most of my friends are 31, in and around 31. Most of them are professionals who do pretty well for themselves, right? I'm privileged. I grew up in a privileged area. People in my network are lawyers or they work for a tech company. They're a dentist, they're an accountant, whatever. You can't buy a house. You can't buy a townhouse because you can't get anything for 6 figures, right? Like if you want a semi-detached townhouse in or around downtown Toronto, you're looking at 7 figures, which means you need help from your parents. Yeah. You need, right? By the time you're 30, you simply haven't saved up 6 figures to put down for a down payment. And they're all getting bid, right? Like my agent, so I'm living in a 2-bedroom condo. I kind of got lucky in the sense that I bought a 1-bedroom condo in a crappier part of Toronto 2.5 years ago. And I had a little bit of help from my mom on the down payment because I was like, I got to get into the market. If I don't get in, I'm screwed, right? Because then if your entry is a house or a townhouse, again, and you're starting from zero, like you have no equity in another house, you're not selling another property to get in, you're looking at a 6-figure down payment. So anyways, I bought a, cheaper, quote unquote, 1-bedroom condo in a not so great area because I knew it was kind of up and coming, like very much gentrifying. And then 3 months ago, I sold it and I bought a bigger 2-bedroom. And the only reason I could afford this is because I was selling off the other one. My agent texted me. I have a good agent. She's like, a family friend, whatever. She texted me 2 days ago. She's like, Josh, you got so lucky. We bought it the perfect time. Condos and houses are insane. Every condo is getting 10 to 20 offers. Everyone that's listed is getting 10 to 20 offers. They're all going for 6 figures above asking. So it's nuts, right? What are we supposed to do, right? 30 years ago, what my dad tells me is like, hey, he didn't even graduate high school, right? He started working in his, late teens, early 20s. And by the time you're like 24, 25, buy a house. A house with a garage that can house 2 cars, right? And obviously the world was very different and there's other nuances and stuff. But the majority of my friends who are quote unquote doing well, right? Like above average or above average earning for our age group, barely any of them own any property. Not to say that you have to at this age, but you can't afford. One of my best friends right now, he's been looking for a house for months. He does very well for himself, right? Like I'm talking like probably 1% of our age group works at like a top corporate firm, makes a lot of money. It's insane. He still can't find anything that they kind of like that isn't over like $1.5 million. So I don't know, right? And then you read the news and stuff. So how is it'll be interesting to see over the next decade or two, how does a generation like ours do in terms of building wealth and equity over the span of a career if you can't get into the real estate market till much later and or for some people never, right? Because if you're single or if you have a dual income that's combined less than 150K, let's say, I don't know the exact number, but let's call it neither of you are making a lot of money. How are you ever going to afford a house, right? How are you ever going to afford the down payment? And then you want to have, because now we're in our early 30s, so it's time to have kids, right? You got to pay for kids. So some people, it's almost like one or the other, right? That's probably part of why the US and Canada, the birth rate's going down. We're staying in school longer. We're focused on our careers for a little bit longer. Can't afford real estate, right? And everything's more expensive, right? Especially now with inflation, right? Today is what, February 17th, just so people who are listening after the fact understand, like, inflation's been crazy, right? The last few months. So buying diapers is that much more expensive. So I don't know, man. I don't know the solution, right? I'm not a finance expert or anything like that, but it's going to be really interesting, maybe in a negative way, to see what happens. I think specifically in Canada, they got to get a little stricter. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to have investment money coming in from outside a country. I think it's a good sign, but I think it's bad if you have hundreds and hundreds and maybe across the country, thousands of houses and properties sitting empty.
Yeah.
Right. Because then where's the utility for that country? Right. There's zero utility. So why do we need that?
Yeah, I'm
right?
of the opinion that if you have more,
Bit of a rant.
I mean, I agree with you. I'm of the opinion that if you own more than two property, it's sliding scale. Like every single, you own more than two properties, it needs to be taxed at a significantly higher rate, and that just keeps going up depending on whatever metric. I mean, I don't know what the amount of properties that makes the most sense to do that.
But you got to be careful though, Josh, right? Because if like, where do you draw the line in the sense that, yes, that something has to be done, right? But let's say I'm an accountant. I live in Hamilton, city like just outside of Toronto. I work as an accountant. I make $100K a year. I work for 5 years and I save, I live with my parents to save money, blah, blah, blah. And I buy a rental property because I do the math. I have enough for the down payment. And based on my projected expenses, I know I can cover it with rent. So I buy one and then I go back to work and I'm still living at home. This is an extreme example, but I still live at home, right? I work another year or two. I save up enough to buy a second rental property. And the only reason why I do it is because I have the money for the down payment and I do the math and I know that I can get tenants that will cover that. Now, another few years go by. I want to buy another property, but Canada has instituted the Josh Boone tax. I'm just being silly here. Every property after your second property that you own, you get taxed an extra 50%. I'm just throwing numbers out. Now, are you taxing that person out of making an additional wise investment? They're a hardworking citizen. They pay their taxes.
I see. That's the thing. I don't have a problem with that. I know several people that are like, they own, a stock of properties. Like they own a portfolio of properties. I know people that are literally property managers. They buy up, they fix up properties, they rent them out, and they have anywhere from 5 to 30 different houses that, or complexes or whatever. I know people that's their living. And like when all this shit was happening with, putting, the foreclosure, the foreclosure, but also the eviction, postponing everything, that really screwed them. And there were people that really took advantage of that. They just stopped paying, and they basically got to live there for a certain amount of time, and it really hurt them, and it was costing them a lot of money. So, and those are small people in the community. There are some that I know. Like I know one guy who buys up properties in kind of a developing area that's not that great, but it's starting to slowly churn. I wouldn't necessarily say it's straight up gentrification, because the area is still, at this time, people that are working class are buying properties there. So it could turn into gentrification, but it's not there yet. And he's buying these properties that are having massive issues, that are sitting empty, that are a wreck. He's fixing them up, and then he's renting them specifically to like industry folks in service industry. And he's basically just like charging them just enough to cover his mortgage, and so it pretty much breaks. You might make a slight profit, but what he's doing is like, hey, as long as this is self-sustaining, you're paying off my mortgage for me. So he's giving people nice places, as long as they're, service industry, people that don't make a lot of money. He's kind of doing that. And it's win-win. People get affordable housing and nice places in an up-and-coming area, and he's getting his mortgages paid off, which eventually will be great for him, So he's building that equity.
But that's why I'm saying, if you put in like a ceiling per property that you own tax, you might dissuade him from
I
doing
get
more
that,
of
but
that,
I'm okay
which
with
I
that.
think is
The reason why
great.
I'm okay
Are
with,
you
yeah,
though?
I'm okay with that. And the reason why I'm okay with that is because that dude is a grave exception to the rule. Like,
Right.
you also, for every one of the people that are like that, as who's an honorable person who cares about the community, who actually wants to put real money in these properties to make them nice and like fix things and not just be like a slumlord, there's a ton of people. And I'm not saying that guy is the only one that exists. There's people out there that are like that. And there's people that I know that have Airbnbs and like they're good people and they mean well, but they're still contributing to fucking Airbnbs that are causing problems. Like I used to just do Airbnbs all the time because I prefer them most of the time over hotels. Now it's like I'm back to just using hotels unless an Airbnb is my only option, like in the middle of nowhere kind of
Mhm.
thing. So it's like I am okay with that because I do not think that residential properties should be looked at as an investment. They should be a place to live. And if you want to invest in it as like it is a hedge against inflation and that's a place that you want to live, that's great. That makes total sense. It's one of the reasons I'm in the process of buying a house right now. And I'm looking at it as a hedge against inflation and basically um, I don't have to pay somebody else's mortgage. I'm building equity and I'm going to live there. I want to be there for a while. Um, Makes sense. I have no problem with that. But like, it doesn't make sense to me to look at buying up a bunch of properties as a means of an investment because that's how we've gotten into this whole issue where people can't fucking afford stuff. There's no reason why someone who makes $100,000 a year cannot buy a house. Like, that's absurd.
Yeah.
And the only reason that's existing is because people are buying these fucking properties. You have the Berkshire Hathaways that are just mass buying up properties, Zillow and all that shit. It sounds like Zillow is taking a step back, but Zillow was coming in,
Yeah.
cash offering 20% over asking price. And 20% over asking price, even in the middle of nowhere, that doesn't have a lot of competition. Here's cash, go. And they were just a sight unseen. And they were doing that. And like my realtor straight up is like, I've been doing this for 30 years in this area. He's like, I have never seen inventory this low, period. And even our house, like we put in a bid, we put in about 10% over asking, and they came back and our realtor said, this is going to get multiple offers. He's like, this is a really nice house. It's very affordably priced for what you're getting. The value's high. He's like, this is going to get a lot of offers. And we came in, saw it the morning that it went on the market, put in the offer, came back, said it had multiple, and was like, you guys got to do better. Could have been bluffing. Highly doubt that they were bluffing. We ended up winning it. But the whole point is the fact that like it around here, even in Dayton, Ohio, which continuously has made like top 10 cheapest places to live, or not cheapest, but most affordable as far as like a place that also has an economy still. It's not in the middle of fucking Arkansas. No offense to Arkansas, but I've heard great things about Arkansas.
Mhm.
But a place that has an actual economy continuously makes those lists. It's still ridiculous here. Like if you have a property that doesn't get sold within a
Yeah.
couple days, there's a reason why, you know. But still, I mean, you're
Yeah.
talking about your guys paying $1.5 million for a house. It's like my house costs 10% of that, and
Mhm.
it's so
Yeah.
fucking cheap here, but it's still ridiculously expensive compared to what it was 5 years ago. You know, so
Right. Well, it's all relative too, right? To where you're living. But I think the best thing the governments could do is look at the percent. Maybe it's less so in the US. In Canada, the big problem seems to be foreign investors. So can the governments not look at like, okay, we have 1 million house owners in the country. What percentage of them are foreign investors? If that's a scary amount, then the problem is the foreign investors and not necessarily the Canadian real estate
sure,
investors. So I don't totally disagree with your approach, but I think the first step should be is how many of these owners are foreign? Not that I have anything against foreign people. I'm just saying in this case, foreign investors might be messing up the real estate market really badly. And so let's fix that. It's an easy solution, right? Double the tax rate or, whatever, add an extra, $100,000. I don't know. I'm just throwing out numbers. Add an extra 50K fee, foreign investor fee, whatever it is, until it cools things down. Otherwise, no one's going to be able to own a house. It's sad.
Yeah. And I mean, here in America, that's the American dream. You can, no matter what, the whole concept of the American dream was that no matter what your circumstances, no matter if you grew up in the most impoverished area, you have the ability to eventually get a decent job and own a home and have a family, and you're not going to be poor. That is no longer exist. Hasn't existed if you're, I mean, we're being honest, that hasn't existed unless you are a suburban white person for a good long while. But, I just remember the George Carlin bit. It's like, they call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it, So it's just, that's, yeah, it is. He had a lot of them, man. But, I agree. I think you have foreign money that just needs to be incentive. It needs to be highly disincentivized for people to come in and buy up residential properties. Commercial properties, maybe less strict on, but residential for sure. And then out of state, here in the United States, it should be out of state. But here's the problem. It's like somebody could just put together an S Corp or an LLC or something in the state of Ohio and be like, okay. And they funnel all the money into it, from, they're in Minnesota. Some wealthy person in Minnesota is like, all right, I want to buy up a bunch of properties in Ohio because, hey, cost of living's cheap there, but it's up and coming. So I can buy really cheap and then ride this wave. They, have somebody, they establish a business entity here. They funnel money into it and then they buy it. It's like, that's a problem. That's happening. I saw that happening downtown here in Dayton with commercial properties. Like, I was talking with people that even when I had my agency here, they wanted us to help them brand buildings downtown and do stuff. And they're just some fucking person and, somewhere in the United States, just random. They didn't even go check the property out. They had somebody local do it and they're just signing checks. And I'm like, that's a problem. Like, I don't want these people out of state who don't understand the local economy. They don't understand the city. They don't understand any of this. And they're now influencing culture here. I don't like it, I mean, fuck, New Orleans has that problem in spades. I spent 9 months living in New Orleans, and that's New Orleans. People have out-of-state money that come in. They're looking at it as an opportunity. They don't understand the culture, and they're destroying it. But, the brass tacks is like, I don't like this idea that having a home as an investment. And I definitely agree that small, the individual person that's living with their parents and saving up and doing all that stuff, or like the guy that I said that's, buying houses, making them nice and do it. Those are great examples that I have far less of a problem with. But you can't, as it stands right now, you can't have one without the other, So I agree, like whatever we can do to disincentivize things, starting at the top and then working our way down. But there's no fucking incentive. There's no incentive for anybody to do that because you've got the Berkshire Hathaways, which I'm sure are lobbying for that shit to not happen, So it's just, I don't know. It's fucked. It's
crazy times.
What keeps you, are you optimistic about the future? And if so, like what keeps you optimistic? Because everything we've been talking about, with some exceptions, has been mighty bleak,
That's true, eh? It's been maybe more negative than I would have thought or I would have planned. That's a really good question, Josh. I don't know. I don't really sit down and think, is the world going in a good place? I think in a lot of ways, it's probably not, right? For a lot of the reasons we just talked about. And I was having this conversation yesterday with, my dad was in town visiting with a few friends. So I met them for lunch and it like randomly got really deep. We were talking about like, do you believe in God? Or, then what's the purpose of living? Blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, I just like want to wake up and do stuff I enjoy and make the world a better place. within the confines of what I can control, because I think we're all going to die and then everything is over. And, you know, some people might agree with that. Some people might not, right? Do you believe in heaven? Blah, blah, blah. But, and I've thought about this a lot over the last few years and whatever. I think whenever I die, the switch goes off and the game is totally over. And so that means I should probably make the most of the game while it's on, right? And so I don't, and I've kind of only evolved more into like having this mindset in the last couple of years. I try not to think or worry too much about what's out of my control or stuff that's going to happen so far in the future that it's not worth spending too much time on right now because it can't be changed. So to circle back to your question, I don't really know. Like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if someone like descended from the ceiling and said, Josh, this is like God or, you know, whatever deity you believe in. And just so you know, the world's going to end. Humanity is going to end in about 100 years because of a nuclear war, right? We all know like nuclear power and tech is getting so good that like one day, if somebody presses the wrong button, like there's going to be something that can like blow up the world or whatever, right? It honestly wouldn't shock me to hear that like in 50 to 100 years, there's some huge nuclear war and all of humanity's wiped out. But to sit here and like worry about it is not really going to get me anywhere. In fact, it's probably going to do the opposite, right? It's just going to make me depressed. So my approach is, you know, we get one shot. I'm lucky. I'm in a privileged position, right? I have a good life. I live in Canada. I have supportive family, friends, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to wake up each day. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to hopefully leave the world a little bit better than when I entered it. And most of the rest is out of my control, you know? I don't know. Maybe that's like overly simplistic or not. What do you think? You relate?
No, I mean, certainly. I go back and forth because that is, I think, objectively about as true as you can really get. You know, there's a.
But maybe it's not. Maybe when we die, there is a heaven and like our souls exist somewhere else. I don't think so.
Maybe. Who knows?
But maybe we'll be surprised, right?
Yeah. I don't, I'm agnostic because I don't, nobody knows. And if they say they know, they're full of shit. They're either a grifter or they are deluding themselves. You can't know. Like you can have a DMT experience, you can have a spiritual experience, you can have whatever. And I'm not saying that that doesn't have value, but you can't try and say that that is objective reality because we don't really know, you know? So my main thing is like, whether there is an afterlife or not, it's kind of irrelevant because this is the only, you know, I think, therefore I am. Like, this is the only fucking reality that we're really aware of. But if you put a gun to my head and said, what do you actually think? Like, you can't say you don't know. I would say this is probably a simulation.
Oh, yeah?
I think this is a simulation. I
Very
ultimately revert back to, we don't fucking know. It doesn't really matter. The lights probably just go out, but you know, maybe there is a sense of reincarnation. I mean, there definitely is reincarnation in the essence that, you know, your death gives a new life. You know, you are fertilizer, you are food, you are all these things, and your energy becomes other life. So, I mean, there is, from that perspective, you never really die. And you were never really started because you always come from something. But that's kind of getting maybe being a little more literal about it. But you know, the main thing for me is just I had a long conversation on a previous episode actually with my buddy Sam McNerney, and my argument was, it doesn't really matter if this is a simulation or not because it effectively is the same thing.
Right.
It's the same experience. There's no difference between this being a simulation and one day, like there's this meme online of like somebody doing something benign and then they're like, congratulations, you figured it out. Like you got yourself out of the simulation. Like you won this round. And that's how I always think about it. Like, to me, I remember I had this acid trip once, and it was just like this voice being like, "Hey, bitch, just to let you know, like, you put yourself into this. You asked for this. This is basically a game. Like, the like, would you shoot Hitler game? Like, if you grew up in Nazi
Mhm.
Germany, would you be a Nazi or would you shoot Hitler? But you grow up as a German child during that time, like, would you naturally figure it out? And of course, the vast majority of people would have been a fucking Nazi, whether they were, they
Mhm.
unless whether they were going with the flow or they vehemently believed it. They're a product of their environment and their time. But it's like basically in this acid trip, it was like something major is going to happen. There's some sort of major pivot point in history, and you want to see if you got thrown in a random body in a random place, would you be able to do something about it? Go, you know? And that's the
Mhm.
simulation. And I came out of that being like, that's probably bullshit. But even if that's real, is it any different from this actually being real? The only difference is that there's a step up. There is an afterlife in the essence that you get unplugged from the matrix and then you're like, "Oh shit, okay, I'm back. Wow. That was a really interesting experience. Um,
Mhm.
wow, I know what it's like to be a white dude now. This is interesting. I haven't done that flavor before. This is a really interesting one. Life was a lot easier. Holy shit.
Mhm.
I empathize with them more now because they still struggle, but god damn, that was like easy mode that time. That was an easy one. Like
Right.
minus that, there's no difference. It's the same. So
Right.
so I tend to take I have two modes basically. One is very much so in line with stoicism, which is very much so overlaps with your philosophy of like what is within your control. That's not to say that you are absolved of responsibility or you are absolved of taking action. A lot of people think Stoics was just go with the flow. They were not at all. But they're like, don't be upset or angered by things that are not in your control. Doesn't mean you don't do anything about it. It's just don't let it affect you outside of making a valid decision. And I agree with
Mhm.
that. But then there's this other part of me that is just definitely completely, I'm an empath and is overwhelmed by all of the pain and the suffering and wants to go into Mr. Robot mode and fuck shit up and do something about it. And the thing is that those two are largely at odds. And that's what I've had to confront with myself over the last couple of years is like my urge is to put some headphones on, blare music, take Adderall, pound a bunch of tea and be like, I'm going to figure this shit out. And I might not be able to like completely upheaval society and change things, but goddamn, I want to fight the good fight. Then there's another part of me that's just like, dude, that's a fucking quagmire. You're
Mhm.
you're giving your blood pressure's through the roof. You're gonna die early, and you're not enjoying your fucking life. So if this is a
Mhm.
simulation and you're going to die, what why don't you enjoy the ride? Like you can still
Mhm.
do good in the world. You can still help people and not suffer because of it. And that's ultimately
Yeah.
where I've landed, but god damn is it tempting to go back to that fucking dopamine chasing like I want to fuck shit up because that's more fun, you know? That's more fun
Yeah.
because
I
but
mean,
it's escapism. I've realized for me it's escapism. I'm distracting myself.
yeah.
I'm hiring that mission to distract myself from the existential pain that is my baseline reality. I'm someone that has generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, and bipolar, and I'm dealing with an autoimmune issue. So my baseline reality is stress, and I look to have these external things like distract me from that. But it's it doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve me, it doesn't
Yeah.
serve my relationships with my partner or anybody else in my life. I'm hurting my body. So it's just like, why do it? Uh, so I
Mhm.
keep going back to just do what you can within your control, and this podcast is my way of contributing in a larger way because it can scale. you know, and I
Right.
hope
Well, I mean,
people get something
you're
out of it.
doing it. I think you're overlooking the other stuff that you do is doing the same thing, but in a different way, right? Like you being a marketing consultant and helping companies, that's of huge value, right?
For sure.
You don't really, you can maybe see it on like balance sheets and stuff, right? But that's obviously you're adding value to the world just in another way, right? You're making other people's lives better. You're helping businesses grow. They're creating more jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So
Sure.
there's numerous ways we can all, leave the world a little bit better. I think the one that I'm curious to hear about how you kind of maybe haven't come to terms with, because I don't know if I have either, but like I don't have any of those things that you mentioned. I've never struggled with, I'm the opposite of ADHD. I'm very mellow. I can stay focused, blah, blah, blah. I've never had any, never really had anxiety, never had depression. And the only thing that's ever really kind of tripped me up in my head, totally in my head, right? All internal, is what we just talked about, which is that one day, could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure one day the lights go out. And if you are like sitting in bed by yourself, thinking about that, that is so depressing, right? Like all we're doing and creating and stuff, like that's going to be gone. Maybe like the book's obviously not going to disappear when I die, whatever. But my whole cognition and being and thoughts and all the learning I've done and all the experience, donezo, right? Okay, people can listen to my podcast, whatever, great, right? That'll hopefully add value. But I don't exist. That's the only thing that's really ever given me pause and or made me think. I kind of want to cry, not right now, but like when I really think about it.
You're free to do so if you wish.
No, I mean, I've come to terms with it, and I think I'm interested to hear what you think. And what I've kind of come to terms with is, number one, try not to think about it too much. Cause like, again, there's nothing we could do and it's depressing as hell.
Yeah.
But like, number two is, to appreciate the time that we have, right? Especially because you and I particularly are so lucky, right? We were born in North America, in my case, in the 90s, to a upper middle class family and given every chance in life to succeed, right? I've had nothing to complain about, right? Like 0.1%, I'm so lucky, right? I'm not just talking financially, right? Carrying Terrence family, blah, 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 good, blah, blah, blah. So focus on that, right? Otherwise, if you just sit and think about life ending, like, I don't know, man, that's super sad, right?
It is, but
What do you think?
I actually think about that. I actually try to think about it as much as I possibly can, because to me, it's a call to action. So,
right.
I've told the story many, many times, so I don't want to bore the shit out of people listening. But for you, it's like David Bowie was the reason that I decided to sell my agency or exit the agency, I should say. And
we talked about Bowie.
Oh,
when you were on my show.
I forgot about that. Fuck, I have the worst memory ever. But yeah, so we talked about Bowie. And the thing is like, that got me thinking. It being Bowie affected me in a certain way because but really it could have been. It was just right place, right time. And the fact that like I saw. Okay, I thought about it. If I was on my deathbed, what would I do? Would I be happy with my life? And then also, so there's two things. If I'm on my deathbed, I get diagnosed with cancer, which I've had a lot of health issues over the course of my life. Like I'm literally being seen with the Cleveland Clinic right now for some pretty serious fucking issues that I'm working on, and it's bad. It's good. Don't be fucking concerned, but like I'm making progress. But like I've dealt with a lot of mental and physical health issues over the course of my life. I've always kind of thought about like, what would I have been able to accomplish if I didn't have all this shit? Now, I appreciate all this because it made me who I am. And I don't know if I would have liked myself if I didn't have to struggle as much, But my baseline reality, like people, it's hard for me to know. I'm not in other people's heads. I don't know what they actually experience, but based on just having as many conversations with people as I have, my baseline reality as far as like my mental health is and my physical health is really not great. It's difficult. There's people that struggle a lot more than me, I'm sure, but it's not fun. And like I it's I often question like would I how much would things be different if I didn't have all that? And what that leads me to is like that has caused me to not do a lot of stuff that I otherwise would have done. And I thought about the fact of like, okay, if I got cancer and I'm going to die, there's two trains of thought there. One, was I happy with what I did up until that moment? Was I happy with how I lived my life? Was I being authentic? Did I feel like I was giving it my all? And two, what the fuck am I going to do with the time that I have left? Am I going, if I wasn't happy with what I did, am I going to make up for it? Am I going to live it to the fullest? Bowie actually obviously had a very accomplished life. And the dude, particularly towards the last half of his life, perhaps, just did whatever the fuck he wanted. Like famously just did whatever he wanted. And so I'm sure I don't know him. I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure he was pretty happy with how he lived his life. Uh, but what was he going to do with the time that he had left? And he did the things he wanted to do. He wrote music and he made this album, which was very, very, for a 69-year-old man, experimental as fuck. And then, he did this musical. And I asked myself, like, what would I do? And that's ultimately what led me to go on the road and all that stuff. I'm using that as an example is like, I do that all the time. I, at least once or twice a year, sit down and be like, what would I do if I had a year left to live? And I think about that because I don't want to get calcified I don't want to just take the easy path. I want to stress myself out. I routinely think if I'm driving and someone kind of like, almost like kind of bumps into me or like someone like kind of rolls over like they hit the red light a little too fast. Like they pump their brakes, they go a little, they slam their brakes on. And I'm like, what would have happened if that guy would have slammed into me? I've actually been in several accidents where I've been T-boned. So like I know what that's like. It's scary. And like when that split second before that thing hits, you have this moment where it's almost like in a movie, like when time slows down and you hear like that kind of tinnitus sound. That kind of hits you for a split second and you have this moment you're like, this might be it. Like, and then afterwards you're like, I'm so thankful that didn't get worse. I remember when the last accident happened, I got T-boned. This person just ran a red light. They were a mom. They had their son, her husband, and their dog in the car. And she just said, sorry, I just wasn't paying attention. I'm like, your whole entire family was in the car. You just ran through a red light. Like, I don't understand how that happens, but okay, whatever. And like, we got lucky. And like, we weren't critically hurt. And I think about that all the time. Like, what would have happened if my partner would have died? What would have happened if I would have been critically hurt? What would have, so I think about those things all the time. And I stress myself intentionally to think about that all the time. That's why I'm doing this podcast. I mean, I started the podcast because like I kind of sat there and I was like, what am I doing? I said I was going to come back after I came out of the road and I was going to do this. I'm not doing it. So to kind of address your last point, the lights go out. I'm okay with the lights going out. It's a shame because I'm like, this is a very finely tuned algorithm. Like if I make it to 80, if I'm lucky enough to do that, everybody in my family dies in their 60s or early 70s, so I'm lucky to make it to 80. Man, that is a lot of life experience. That is a very finely tuned algorithm, and that just goes away. And maybe at that point we'll be able to upload consciousness or whatever, but at that point it's like that's not you. There's an episode of Futurama where they clone Fry and then Fry dies and then they clone him again. It's like Fry's dead. The lights went out with that last Fry. This is a clone. This is a completely different person. Their consciousness ceased to be. And then this new person took over the role of Fry, but Fry does not exist anymore. That's another Fry that died. To you, it's canon. To you, that's the same person, but that ain't the same person. All those people all that, it makes you think about what consciousness and self even is. But personally, I feel like I don't want the ride to stop. For the first time in my life in the last year, I think I legitimately actually enjoy my life. I haven't really enjoyed it much prior to that, to be honest with you. I would say
Really?
it's been more painful than not. I've enjoyed moments of it, but in the last like year or so, I've really legitimately been very content and enjoyed my life, even in spite of some of the health issues that I've been dealing with. And having got this podcast out, I just feel far more at ease. I don't really feel that proud of most of the business shit that I've done or any of the consulting that I've done in comparison. I am proud of it, but this is way more impactful for me because I felt like if I got diagnosed with cancer and they're like, you have 3 months left to live, I, I would be like, at least I got the stuff out that I wanted to say. And I could have done a lot more, but at least I tried, you know? So death doesn't bother me much anymore. I don't want the lights to go out right now, but I think once I get older, I'll probably be okay with it.
Yeah. I feel like we probably all will eventually, right? Like we're still young guys with hopefully the majority of our lives ahead of us. So it makes sense. The thought of it ending would be upsetting. But kind of like you alluded to, when we get into our 80s, 90s, I want to live to 100 personally. And especially with the way medicine and stuff's going, I think we'll all be able to live to 100 unless something happens,
I
right?
mean,
You get hit by
100
a
could be
car
the
or
new
whatever.
60, you know?
Exactly. But I think we will get to a point, I hope. Part of my hope is, to answer my own question too, is I will get to a point where I'll be so satisfied with the life I've lived that I'm ready to move on.
Yeah.
Even if moving on means being deleted effectively. I don't know. Otherwise, it's not worth thinking about.
Yeah.
It is in the almost like motivational way you use it in. And so that's kind of what I've taken the approach of as well, right? Can't control it. I get one of them. So make sure that every day, it's like, I think Steve Jobs had a good quote where it's like, every day I would wake up, look in the mirror and ask myself if I was excited about what I was working on. If I wasn't, then I would change it. It's effectively the same thing you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best way that people can approach their lives. Because especially if you get into a rhythm, a rhythm meaning pattern that you're not happy with, it's easy to just get caught in it, right? Never make any serious changes, never make any improvements, and never take any risks. And the other thing too, I've thought a little bit more about is like, as we become adults, I think it becomes harder to create what I like to think about is like big moments. Like if I think back to like my teens, there's a few big moments that happened that I'll never forget, right? One of them was, pat on the back here. We won the city championship in football, grade 10. And I'll never forget lifting the trophy. I remember everything, right? Like it was yesterday. Because in life, the best moments are when you work hard for long periods of time and achieve something that's challenging, right? It wasn't easy. It didn't come in a week. It didn't come in a month, right? In this case, it took months and months of practice and rep and beating tough opponents and reaching the top of the mountain, right? Like climbing Everest. And those are the moments that you never forget that like make it worth all the tough parts because life's not easy, right? Every day isn't sunshines and rainbows, right? That's why they have that saying. But then what happens is you graduate and maybe you graduate and you start working in a wide variety of, professions or companies. And it's easy for life to get pretty boring, right? Like those moments didn't happen as often. So I started thinking to myself, this was really just like 2 years ago. How can I still try to incorporate those moments? They don't all have to be huge challenges with like a finish line, but something, like, I don't like, you go see the pyramids, or what I've been doing is right now I'm training for a marathon because I was like reflecting on those moments from my teenage life. And I started reflecting on them and looking for patterns. And in my case, two of the big moments were sports related. I've always played sports my whole life pretty competitively. Not anymore, right? I'm a lawyer, right? I'm not going to go play tackle football, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to the NFL. So I was like, well, how can I best try to replicate that given where I am today? And at the time I was reading David Goggins. I think it's called Can't Hurt Me. I don't know if you've read his book. Highly recommend it.
I'm
Especially if
familiar
you
with them.
need,
Yeah.
especially if you need like a little kick in the ass. I like to read kind of like, I take the Tim Ferriss approach of like, just in time learning. So if I'm like, I'll take you back like 2.5 years ago, professional life was fine. I was feeling unmotivated working out. I've always been active. I keep in shape, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't motivated. I was going to the gym 2-3 times a week. I was in good shape. It's like, oh, I'm bored. I've been lifting weights for years, and so I picked up, a friend recommended Goggins. I picked up his book, and he does a lot of running. This guy runs like ultra marathons, right? Like 100-mile races, like shit I will never do. But what I kind of took away from the book, and at the same time, while I was like personally thinking about those moments in my life that I'll never forget, and that I think we should have throughout our whole life, not every day, but maybe once or twice a year, because otherwise they lose their value if they happen too often, is how can I create another moment like that? And then I'm reading his book. And I'm like, well, I should do something like I'm happy with my professional career, but I'm kind of feeling unmotivated and the physical side and like the health side. So I'm like, I'm going to run a race so that I can put myself in a situation where I could maybe have one of those moments. And so what I did was, this is turning into a kind of side story, but maybe it'll be interesting and it'll maybe explain my point a little bit more, and how I'm trying to like keep life exciting and positive and worth living is I decided to run a marathon. And I'm not a runner. If you watch me play quarterback, you'd know I'm not a runner, because I was like a traditional, I don't know how much you know about football, like pocket passer. I'm slow. I'm not agile. I'm not known for running. And I read the book and I was like, this sounds like it'd be cool because it's a challenge. It's new. I've never ran races, never ran a 10K in my life. And it's something that's going to take like 5+ months of training, and it's still going to be hard. I decided to run a marathon. Never ran a 10K in my life. Decided to run a marathon. So like, well, I'm going to push myself a half. I'm athletic. I train for 2 months. I can run a half, whatever. You suck it up. Maybe I'm sore the next day. I wanted something that was like, this is going to take me minimum 4 or 5 months to train for, and I still could fail. Because I want that extra push so that when I cross the line, knock on wood, hopefully when I cross that finish line, it's like borderline tears coming down your eyes, right? I put in blood, sweat, and tears for months and months and months. And I go into work and I do my work and I file my taxes and I'm an adult, blah, blah, blah. But it's almost like on the side, I'm training to do this thing very few people have ever done. And at the end of it, not doing it for anybody else, the end of it, I'm going to say, damn, man, you didn't think that you could really do this. And you did, because of nothing other than your hard work and determination over a long period of time. And I think maybe if we can try and work more of those moments into our lives, not often, once a year, right? Maybe 1 or 2 a year max, that can add a lot more flavor and meaning to life. I don't know, man. That was a tangent.
I think this is a beautiful one.
Maybe there's something in there,
Yeah. Let's end on that. I think that's a really good note, man. What how can people reach you? What is there anything you want to say in closing, man? Is there anything that we didn't talk about?
I don't know. I feel like you and I could just talk for hours and we'd find stuff to talk about, you know? So I
Well,
really enjoyed.
this is technically round 2 because we were on your podcast, which
That's true.
you guys should all totally listen to. I'll put in the show notes that episode.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
think I think you were episode 108. We'll put it in the show notes, but Josh
yeah.
came on my show, the Solopreneur Grind podcast. Was an absolute pleasure. So I biasly recommend checking that out.
What real quick? What did you think? Because that was for reference. That was the first long form you've done. Like most
mhm.
of your episodes were like 30 minutes to an hour, right? So this
Yeah,
one was
on
like a
average,
little over
like
2 hours.
35 to 45 minutes. And ours
Yeah.
was a couple minutes over 2 hours. And it's the first long form podcast I've ever done, period, right? As
Oh
a
wow.
host or a guest. And I loved it. So I'll give you 2 key pieces of like my conclusion. Number 1, I loved it. It made for a way more meaningful conversation. I highly recommend people check it out. Number 2, it was logistically difficult in the sense that the file is so much bigger. You got to do more editing. It takes
Yeah.
longer to generate on YouTube. And like, so it's like behind the scenes, it was more of a pain in the ass. Not in like, I'll never do it again, but in the sense of like, I think I'm just going to do it once in a while because my podcast, I think I alluded to this earlier, is like much more of a passion project, right? So I'm doing like 1 or 2 a month. I don't do a ton of editing. I like to think the conversations are like pretty good in and of themselves. That like I don't tweak so the voice volumes are perfect, blah, blah, blah. And people seem to really like them. So I don't think I'm going to be a full-time long form podcaster, but I really enjoyed it. And I do think that if what I'm working on now pays my bills, right? Immigration firm and immigration tech. If I ever exited from that and were to move on to a next thing, that's when I would maybe pull more of like a Josh Boone and be like, okay, now I'm going to spend way more time on my podcast. I'm going to do long form because there's so much value there. Like the quality of conversation that I never talked about whether I believe in heaven or not on my own show, right? Mainly because I'm asking the questions, but also because we never get that deep. And you and I talked about this. We actually had a good conversation on our episode about why we like long form podcasts. So if people want to
Yeah.
listen to that, you know, I won't get back into that because we covered it on ours, but extreme value there. So I think it's 108 or 109. We'll link to it in the description. I highly recommend people check that out. If you're specifically looking for a show where what I kind of do in 35 to 45 minutes is go into how people got into their business, right? What did their career look like? How did it lead into entrepreneurship? And what were kind of like the key lessons and takeaways along the way so that if people are looking to start their own business or grow their own business, they hopefully don't have to learn as many lessons the hard way. We all do, but you know, maybe a few less of them the hard way. Other than that, you can check me out on LinkedIn, Josh Schachnow. That's where I'm probably most active. And then you can check out, I have the website. So if you want to just learn more about me, find out about the podcast, I have guested on a bunch of other podcasts, not long form, but if you want to hear me on other podcasts or check out my blog, just go to joshschachnow.com. It's all there. I have an email list. So I send an email every 2 weeks where I just give a quick, hey, this is what some updates in my business life. Here's like a key takeaway from the last 1 or 2 weeks. Here's my recent podcast episode. It's almost like a little journal from a solopreneur who's like, you know, going through the grind.
Yeah,
So
I saw some of those and I really dug it. It felt like old school blogging, early Seth. I don't want to say Seth Godin, but like just those really old school kind of more like before blogging became this. I don't know, just this weird thing. It's pretty personal and I like it because it gives you a window into what you're dealing with.
mhm,
I really dig that. But
yeah. So if you
yeah,
just if you go to the website and click join, you can sign up, can unsubscribe at any time. You know, all that. I'm not spamming anybody here. And that's it.
Hell yeah, man.
If you're ever in
Thank you
Toronto,
so
let me
much.
know.
Oh, I will be. I got a couple friends there. So it would be fucking fun to kick it. Maybe we do one in person.
Yeah,
And it's actually not that far. It's like a 7-hour drive for me. 6
not at
hours. I
all.
think it's like 6 hours. It's not that bad.
Mhm.
Fuck, man. I like long drives. I mean, I traveled in an RV for whatever, so that doesn't bother me. So we'll make that happen at some point down the line. Fuck yeah, man. Thank you. Looking forward to more down the road.
Yeah, appreciate it, Josh. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for the introduction to long form podcasting. I'm forever a fan.
Welcome. And that is it for this episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, it would mean the world to me if you give us a quick like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I know everybody asked for this, but that really is the best way you can kind of help us out. We'll be able to grow the channel, put more resources into this, and get some of the dream guests that I really want to have on for you guys. Also, if you use podcast apps, be sure to look up The Josh Boone Show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever the hell you listen to podcasts, and we show up on your feed there too. So, until next time, peace y'all.